Welcome back to our Munich Cyber Security Conference, MCSC 2029, here in Munich. I welcome you to this second day of cybersecurity, rethinking cyber strategies in tumultuous times. Here with me is Peter Möhring. Hi, Peter. Happy to have you here today. He's from Security Network Munich, and you have some information for us. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you for this kind introduction. Yeah, Security Network Munich, the organizer of this event, could never set up such a great forum without its partners that you see next to me. We have constant partners from the corporate world, but also from the institutional side, who made this wonderful conference possible. The agenda said that 𝗀𝗏𝗂𝗶𝘁𝘆 will be here today to opening the second day. He gives us kind regards, and in his name and his board colleagues, board members of Security Network Munich and Chairman 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, he gives also his warm welcome to you. I know we have people watching from Japan who have now, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the evening, and the East Coast in North America is just joining this session on breakfast television. So thank you all for joining this great forum here at the legendary Hotel Bayerischer Hof, where we always celebrate the Munich Cyber Security Conference since its very beginning. I would like to also mention the Bavarian Ministry of Commerce, who is patronizing this event since the first edition, and made it possible to have this constant development in this dialogue on such an important subject as improving the information and cyber security. Talking about the partners, here on the institutional partners, you know, we have the Cyber Readiness Institute, we have ASM Institute, we have the Information Security Forum from London. So all the ones that you see here have been actively involved in preparing this program. And the Charter of Trust, as a matter of fact, was created a couple years ago, also during the Munich Cyber Security Conference, which is, of course, one of the key partners in the setup of the Munich Cyber Security Conference. So we are a small sort of a baby of that political, very famous Munich Security Conference. But I'm very glad today to announce another initiative which will be launched today. It is the Ensure Collaborative. 7 clusters from Europe joined forces. They represent about 1,500 companies and organizations from the private and the public sector to exchange and collaborate on cyber and information security. Please check out who they are. It's a great honor to present them and to work with them. Said this, I think, Sabina, back to you. I think we start with a live connection to New York City.
Very good. It's my very great honor to announce our first conference guest today, our distinguished guest of honor, Her Excellency Madeleine Albright, 64th Secretary of State of the United States of America, professor, author, businesswoman, diplomat. She was the first female Secretary of State and became, at that time, the highest ranking woman in the history of the US government. Dr. Madeleine Albright will be interviewed by Her Excellency Marina 𝗀𝗀𝗄𝗏. I'm very curious to hear your views and your insights. Please go ahead.
Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, and good day to everybody who is watching us from Japan to US in different time zones. Dear Madeleine, it's always a great pleasure to see you and listen to you, and I'm really thrilled and honored to have today a discussion with you.
I'm delighted to join you. I really am, and to have the opportunity to spend time talking with you, Madam Minister, my good friend Marina. So we will have a good discussion. Thank you for inviting me.
Madeleine, we're living through challenging times. Besides COVID pandemic, there are other worrying developments. Yesterday, for example, the European Parliament adopted a very critical resolution on Russia's aggressive behavior. EU-Russia relations are at its lowest. US administration expelled Russian diplomats and Russia retaliated. Also, China is becoming more assertive, powerful, and vocal. Dear Madeleine, you are known for thinking out of the box, and you are known for bold ideas. What is your take on the present international situation, and more precisely on transatlantic relations? What is your advice to US and European leaders? Because needless to say, Europe was excited and happy after the last presidential elections. President Biden has a standing invitation to come to Brussels. We're waiting to see him here, and I know that he will do it soon.
Well, you have asked many questions that really show, I think the world is a mess. That's a diplomatic term of art. Things are bad. I really do think that if one looks at the various issues that are out there beyond the ones that you mentioned in terms of what Russia's doing, what China's doing, the challenge of climate change, obviously the COVID, but also that there are issues throughout the world in different countries. Every continent, there are some issues that need to be dealt with. And part of the issue, frankly, is also that we don't have the international institutions that are in many ways up to speed in terms of dealing with them. They need to be rejuvenated in some ways, and we need to decide which ones are the ones that really are operational. I do think that what has made a difference in the United States is the election of President Biden, who has a very different approach. And by the way, he's somebody that I know very well because we worked together when he was a senator and I was secretary, and we knew each other even before that. And he has a very broad understanding of international issues, I think, and frankly, probably more than any president we've had in a very long time, and a deep interest. And he understands, and it started with his inauguration speech, that America had to be back. America had to be a part of the system, and that we would re-enter the system with humility. And I think that that is the way he is approaching things. He gave a very interesting speech 2 nights ago, in Congress, in which he outlined a very different approach to the issues in the United States that have to be dealt with, but at the same time, I think made clear to the American public, as he talked about the national security issues, how domestic and foreign policy go together, which I think is a very important part in a democracy. By the way, I think that one thing that I have been reading, the intelligence community, our intelligence community has just put out a document, Global Trends 2040. It's unclassified. And they have made very clear what the various issues are that have to be dealt with, some that are immediate, but some that are the longer term ones that need to be dealt with now in a very specific way with partners, which leads me to one of the things you also asked. The transatlantic relationship is absolutely essential. And I think that it's something that was very important before, and as a result of what happened in World War II, but we now have to make clear that it is a crucial aspect of how we work and live together.
Thank you, Madeleine. You are known for being a very strong supporter of transatlantic ties. And it's really encouraging to hear from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean that there is interest, there is willingness, there is commitment to have new or to restore the work of NATO, to give more impetus to NATO, and to have closer transatlantic ties. So from Brussels, I can only say that we're looking forward to President Biden's visit to Brussels. But coming to another topic, I'm really happy and honored to be part of your group of exes. Well, those who don't know, that's the club or group of former foreign ministers. Madeleine, you keep us busy. You keep us busy about learning about new topics, discussing new topics. You keep us busy about thinking about the world today and making suggestions to the better world to come. So recently we had a series of presentations and discussions about cybersecurity. The pandemic has brought digital topics to the center of political attention. Everybody is discussing digital, everybody's going digital. But if we look from the perspective of cybersecurity, how do you see the biggest challenges for international community, but also for our transatlantic relations?
I think it is at the basis of what the future is bringing to us. And yet, I have to say, I think that even a lot of experts don't understand all the ramifications of it. And average people in countries do know that there's the internet of everything, and that you know, their refrigerator talks to them, or that things are very automatic. But they don't see the other side of this. What are we learning? Who is in control? What do we know? And again, this particular report, this global trends, I think has a whole section on the impact of technology on our daily lives, and the importance of understanding, and especially, I think, issues to do with artificial intelligence, the whole issue of cyber, of whether cyber is a friend or an enemy. And it's very interesting, because one of the things is that what has happened, as I mentioned, there is the Internet of Things, but it has actually also led to fragmentation in our societies, because it exacerbates the divisions. And I think we need to know the social effect of all of this. And then the other part, if I may say, is that you are in Brussels and the EU makes rules, and we don't yet have norms that really govern how the cyber systems, how artificial intelligence works. And even though the transatlantic relationship is the most basic one in terms of values, we need to figure out how to use the systems to develop some norms that we understand what is really happening. But it has affected, it's affected our elections, it's affected how we see what the Russians are doing in Central and Eastern Europe to undermine democracy. It affects how the Chinese are operating. So it is a new, in some ways it's a gift, and in another way, it's kind of the genie out of the bottle, trying to figure out what we do with it. And therefore, having these kinds of discussions, whether we have it among the former foreign ministers, or we have it with people that are in power now, as you are in the parliament, and then also that the average people understand what is going on with this. It's a very, very big assignment.
Madeleine, I very much agree with your emphasis on international law norms, because we need clear understanding what are the rules of behavior in cyberspace. We've been saying that international law applies to cyber, but unfortunately we do not see that the whole world acts according to the words. Unfortunately, we see in the United Nations and internationally ideological division between different states. So how to continue discussion on multilateral level, multi-stakeholder level in these difficult circumstances?
Well, I think the hard part is that we do come at it differently. I mean, I have to say, democracies, we believe in free speech and freedom, and the opportunity to exchange information and to understand each other. The authoritarian governments are able to use this tool to control people, and to undermine the way that we understand each other. And so developing those norms, and it's very hard in organizations where everybody is represented, but we need to understand this. And this is going to take a lot of effort in order to develop the norms. And the truth is, you know, I always say this, I was born in Prague, and I just happened to have been raised in the United States. So I'm the example of the transatlantic relationship. And we disagree often. We disagree in terms of some of the rules on privacy, a number of ways that we do things, and yet we have more in common than any other group of people. And so I do think that we are going to have to take a leadership role in this. And you have, frankly, I think it's been remarkable. And also, you come from a country that has been really modern in many ways for a long time, in terms of being an e-country that really understands it. But you have also been the victim of attacks from the outside through this new tool. And so I think there's nobody better than a representative of Estonia to really be leading this discussion.
Madam, thank you for your kind remarks, but still, I'd say that we need different voices. We need people coming from very different backgrounds and coming from the cybersecurity community. I'd say that we also need globally strong and committed US voice. When we talk about digital topics, when we talk about cybersecurity, we missed it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it will be now back on international arena.
We'll be back. I have to say, there's a great desire to be back, and President Biden has made that clear. But what is also interesting is that there have been commissions that have been looking about what to do, something called the Solarium Commission, that had a set of recommendations about how to strengthen the internal structure of the US government in order to be able to deal with this, that it's not just the Defense Department, that it's really a whole of government. There has now been somebody who came to speak to our group last time, Chris Inglis, who's been named as the chief officer to really deal with this out of the White House. And there is going to be an approach of how to work this. The other part that makes this both interesting and complicated, it's not just governments, it's the private sector. And that relationship between the public and private sector is something that also is a challenge for you and for us and how we do this. So the more we do together, the better.
I can completely agree with everything you said. Dear Madeleine, you know what day it was yesterday? It was the 29th of April. And Europe celebrated the Day of Solidarity Between Generations. It was first introduced in 2012. And I have to say that it is becoming more and more popular among different generations. And I'm proud that I have at home 4 generations. My mother, 95, my grandson, 7 months old. So I have the privilege of living with different generations. Dear Madeleine, you are always known for being inspiring to all generations, to different generations, and especially to women in politics, to women in diplomacy, to women in cybersecurity. Madeleine, what would you like to say today to women, and maybe especially to young women who are watching you?
Well, I do think that we have been watching how there have been more women that have come into places in the political world and the business world and the educational world, scientific world. And I believe very strongly, the most famous thing I ever said was that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support each other. We need to have more women in the room. It always helps. And when you became part of my group of former foreign ministers, we now have more of us there. But I also do think the cross-generational thing is so important, because I think it is accurate to say that the younger generation understands technology better than the others. And we have a very famous poet, Robert Frost, who said, "The older I am, the younger are my teachers." And that is the way I feel now about the younger generation, men and women, how they work together, and they really have a better sense of the technology. But I am delighted to see women. And by the way, there was a great picture. I talked about President Biden's speech to Congress. It was the first time in history, excuse me, that 2 women were sitting behind him. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and our Vice President, Kamala Harris. It is a big step forward. America always wants to be first in everything. We're not first in terms of women prime ministers and women presidents, but we are working on it, and we all have to work together, and the support that women give to each other, I think, is very, very important, which is why I love having you as part of my group.
Madeleine, thank you so much for your kind words. And the quote was excellent. I remember it, and I'll take it with me. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I hope that we'll be invited to a talk show on CNN or anywhere else where we can have more time to discuss all of the interesting topics. But I'd like to thank you for being always available, for being open and frank, for your time you are dedicating to international affairs, to interesting topics, to cybersecurity, to women of all generations. Thank you so much for letting me to talk to you today, because I know that in the audience, there are hundreds who would like to talk to you. Today, I was privileged. Hopefully, next time, there will be anybody else. Dear Madeleine, thank you so much.
Dear Marina, thank you, and congratulations on everything you're doing and your leadership role across so many different subjects. All my best to you, and good luck, and we'll see each other soon, some way.
Some way. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bring your insights to the public. Thank you, Her Excellency Madeleine Albright, and thank you also, Excellency Marina 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃. So I'm very much looking forward now to our keynote speaker. Today, Helga Schmidt, Secretary General. We have a change of program. Let's continue with the opening remarks of Her Excellency Ана Brnabić, Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia, elected in October 2020 for the second time. In the past, Ана Brnabić has particularly worked on the reform of public administration, implementing e-government in Serbia. This meant a much more efficient and transparent administration and a tool for fighting corruption in Serbia. She is a member of the Group of New Leaders for Europe, of the World Economic Forum, and the advisory board of the organization World Minds. Prime Minister Brnabić, we are very happy to have you here today.
Dear all, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important event and talk about a topic which has perhaps never been more important than today. The world around us is becoming faster, more complex, and more connected on a daily basis. As leaders of government, we need to help our people and our economies keep pace with these new developments and utilize them to their advantage. When I entered the office, I set clear and ambitious goal: start transformation of Serbia's economy and turn it into technologically modern, digitized, research and innovation driven. We have started with transformation of our education and our public administration. We introduced coding and programming as mandatory subjects in elementary schools, so that kids today in Serbia learn Scratch, Python, Pygame, and Jupyter as mandatory subjects in primary schools. As of this school year, we're also introducing basis of artificial intelligence into elementary schools. We are connecting all of our schools to high-speed internet and introducing digital textbooks and digital classrooms. We have increased the number of targeted IT classes in high schools and expanded capacity at tech universities so they can enroll more students. We also invested heavily into technical infrastructure, science and technology parks, and research institutes to enable and encourage local startup and innovation companies. In terms of public administration, we have placed huge importance on e-government in order to have transparent and efficient public services available to both citizens and businesses 24/7, 365 days a year. We saw clear benefits of these changes, and especially during COVID-19 pandemic, and also especially with respect to mass immunization campaign, when thanks to e-government and digitization, our citizens were able to apply and choose vaccine in an easy, efficient, and straightforward manner. And we, as a government, were able to track this important process in real time, organize it logistically, and manage it successfully. But of course, as with anything, despite numerous positive elements, brought about by these changes. We must always recognize the vulnerabilities and challenges they certainly bring. Addressing these is yet another space where governments can play a leadership role. Let's be very clear. Cybersecurity is a real issue and potentially a huge threat. In Serbia, we have moved swiftly to prevent attacks online and keep our people and our critical infrastructure safe. We have laid out in details key pieces of our cybersecurity strategy. We have built a strong cybersecurity policy and legal foundation. We founded the National Center for Prevention of Security Risks in ICT Systems, which collects and exchanges all of the information on potential risks and then warns the ICT community and public. We have developed 2 state data centers, consolidating much of the existing data into one place and housing our most important registers like citizens' ID cards. Serbia takes the protection of its citizens' data very seriously, which is why we legally require that sensitive data be stored within the country, ensuring we can provide the highest safety standards. And we are continually training government officials in cybersecurity to avoid cases of cyber breaches and ensure public officials develop the skills needed to detect attacks and respond if needed. Finally, and extremely importantly, we understand just how crucial international cooperation is when it comes to fighting cybercrime. That's why we are committed to enhancing communication among all stakeholders, sharing the best practices and lessons learned over the years, and participating in the international processes related to cyber. This is the only way to keep all of us safe. Serbia is proud of our efforts thus far, which have earned high ratings from key cybersecurity indexes like the World Bank's one. And we are eager to continue working through forums like this one with others to keep learning and sharing best practices. I thank you once again for the opportunity to speak, and I'm sending you my best regards from Serbia.
Thank you, Prime Minister Ana Brnabić. So now, our keynote speaker today is Helga Schmidt, Secretary General of the OCSC. She has held several prominent diplomatic positions during her career. Let me just mention 2 of them. She was Secretary General for the European External Action Service and the Deputy Secretary General for Political Affairs for the European External Action Service. Please welcome here Helga Schmidt.
Excellencies, dear participants, they say only a crisis produces change. But is the COVID-19 pandemic a watershed moment for cybersecurity? Surely the digitalization of our world was well underway and accelerating even before the pandemic. Yet, I think no one will doubt that the pandemic has forced us to embrace technology and with it its inherent risks at even greater speed. Our fast increasing reliance on cyberspace also raises the stakes and the likelihood of a cyber incident, destabilizing the already delicate relations between states. In the field of cyber diplomacy, the pandemic has revealed that not everything can be digitized, least of all in-person engagement in confidence and trust building. But with more and more professional, political and diplomatic activities migrating to the digital sphere, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE for short, has adapted to promoting stability, peace and democracy in an increasingly online world. With 57 participating states in North America, Europe and Asia, the OSCE is the world's largest regional security organization, using political dialogue and practical work to ensure the comprehensive security of over 1 billion people. Our approach to security encompasses politico-military, economic, environmental and human dimensions. Recently, the OSCE contributed to the work of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group, which, as you know, issued its final report in March this year. Encouragingly, the report highlighted the important role of regional organizations, including the OSCE, in contributing to cyber stability. So you might now wonder, what is exactly the OSCE doing in this field? And why is this contribution so important? In the past decade, the OSCE has served as an incubator of UN recommendations and a pioneer in adopting regional cybersecurity confidence-building measures. These confidence-building measures represent a crucial pillar of the global cyber stability framework and are aimed at promoting cooperation, reducing misperceptions, and helping prevent escalation that may lead to conflict. Confidence-building measures may not prevent a deliberate cyber incident, but they can create an atmosphere of trust and confidence where one is much less likely to occur. To date, OSCE participating states have adopted 16 confidence-building measures that create and increase transparency, enhance cooperation, and foster greater preparedness, also by involving many different stakeholders. What do these look like? And how do they work in practice? Let's assume that a participating state has become aware of a cyber incident on its own territory that might involve critical infrastructure or governmental systems. With the available information, it might be difficult to have certainty about the intent and even the identity of the attackers. So instead of drawing conclusions based on incomplete information, which could lead to increasing tensions and escalations, the concerned participating state can reach out to the authorities of the country it suspects the attack has originated from and exchange information to have a full picture. So recognizing the need for rapid notifications and crisis communication, OSCE participating states have created a network of national points of contact, including both policy makers and technical experts. I'm aware that this might just sound like having a few names and contact details in a virtual phone book, but this is not the case. Thanks to conscious efforts by our participating states and with the support of the OSCE Secretariat, the network is a living community of policymakers that work together to promote cyber stability. The opportunity to meet in person and exchange best practices can create valuable partnerships between states, not always having previously engaged with each other. As you can imagine, the information shared in these cases might be of a particularly sensitive nature. So having a secure channel is critical to ensure that information is transmitted securely and its authenticity preserved. Can the OSCE provide a secure channel for all of our 57 participating states? As an organization that specializes in confidence-building measures, we were able to take advantage of the already existing communications network that allows participating states to exchange secure notifications and has so far mainly been used in the context of arms control. These are just a few tangible examples of the dynamic and productive discussions that are taking place through the confidence-building measures process. States are further using the OSCE as a platform to conceptualize, exchange and adopt best practices on topics such as critical infrastructure protection and public-private partnerships. To further demystify confidence-building measures and present the status of their progress, the OSCE recently launched a publicly available e-learning course that I warmly recommend to the audience. Beyond the OSCE framework also, confidence building measures are gradually finding more applications and an ever bigger audience. Other regional organizations are building confidence and cooperation among its members. In fact, both the Organization of American States and the ASEAN Regional Forum have followed suit in adopting their own sets of confidence-building measures. Recognizing this, the United Nations has encouraged further cross-regional exchanges and has also been calling for formalizing dialogue between regional organizations on these issues. In June this year, the OSCE will be co-organizing its third biannual inter-regional conference on cyber ICT security with the Republic of Korea. Through this conference and other frequent international exchanges, the OSCE stands ready to share its experiences and help link diverse regional efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, challenges in cyberspace are global in nature, and regional efforts must mirror this fact. The OSCE will continue to be guided by the recommendations of past, current, and future UN processes. In turn, we will share our own lessons learned from our set of confidence-building measures that we are deploying to improve security in cyberspace. Thank you very much for your attention.
Helga Schmidt, thank you very much for your explanations and insights. I'm very happy to announce now the moderator of our next panel, our fourth panel here at the Munich Cyber Security Conference, Sandro Geiken. Sandro is director of the Digital Society Institute at ESMT in Berlin. He is also a policy advisor. He is a director in NATO's SPS program. He authored the first cyber foreign policy strategy for Germany, and he was instrumental in the German-Chinese no-spy agreement. You will find Sandro also in business. He just founded the first full-spectrum private intelligence agency, Monarch. Sandro, your topic for the fourth panel, more cyber security through digital sovereignty. I leave it up to you to introduce your guests.
Can you move a little bit to the center of the camera?
For the kind introduction. So I'm very honored and pleased, of course, to be here at the Munich Cyber Security Conference. Despite the digital format, I would love to be with you, Peter, and the gang in Munich now in the hotel, but we hopefully get back there next year. So I just want to briefly set the scene before I'll introduce my excellent panel we're having here. So the topic digital sovereignty is actually something that came up a while ago, and that's keeping us busy, in particular in Germany, from a number of different angles, privacy, security, but also and more narrowly over the last time, the German industries. And it's beginning to become a topic of greater maturity, of greater interests. So I think it is important to understand the connection that we have between sovereignty and security. So how are the two related? I was thinking about a citation from Winston Churchill. I like to cite Winston Churchill. And he once reportedly said that the only statistics you can trust are the ones you have falsified yourself, which is a common saying in Germany. And this kind of relates to our topic because IT has a similar problem. There's a lot of state-driven interest to have hidden trapdoors in IT for law enforcement, for espionage, for sabotage in some cases. And the complexity of IT, unfortunately, is so huge, and the backdoors, kill switches, and intentional little errors are so tiny and can look so innocent that it's technically and operationally impossible to validate a system if you have not built it yourself. So maybe a cyber Winston Churchill would have said the only IT you can trust is the one you have falsified yourself. Otherwise, you will never know what's in there. And there's a big difference if you are putting something in an IT because you own it in comparison to the certainly still dozens to hundreds of vulnerabilities which are inside these systems anyway. So you could say that any state can hack any machine at any moment and plant something in there, which is certainly true. But having your very own architecture, your own backdoors, kill switches is very different from that. So this axis first of all, is legally required. So even if you discover it and remove it, it will come back in the next iteration of the technology, one way or another. And these kind of accesses are architecturally manufactured and built into these systems. So they enable very high privileges, full access, they're invisible to security mechanisms, they cannot be removed, they can switch off all systems of that brand. And that's a lot of potential power inside these systems of the state who kind of owns the technology one way or another. So in a way, and this is one concern that we're certainly having in many of the German industries, but also in the German government for many technologies that we're looking at, you could become a de facto hostage of the political will of the actor behind it. Be that in China, that you're hostage to a totalitarian dictatorship, or be that there may be backdoors in there for law enforcement from other entities from more friendly nations. One way or another, there's something in there that you cannot control. This, of course, is not critical in all cases. I mean, consumer electronics may be the thing that we worry about most, our mobile phones in day-to-day life. But actually, a lot of other technologies may be way more critical. So critical national infrastructures, for example, military technology, economically critical communication technologies are very different, because there is clearly desirable to not have the possibility of foreign access and to have innovative sovereignty over the baseline technologies as well, because you will be building on top of these technologies entire ecosystems of your own digital making. And then when you're dependent also in terms of innovation on someone else, then you're also not just having not sovereignty in security, you're also not sovereign in innovation. So at this point, sovereignty actually matters. So the question is, how can I assess that? And manufacturers, of course, will lie to you about the trustworthiness. So the main element by which to assess them is their sovereign affiliation and the nation's interests in backdoors, kill switches, and the like. And at this point, unfortunately, especially the big IT countries have a substantial interest in offensive cyber. So China, we know, is very big on network technology, but still #1 internationally in industrial espionage and very big in strategic espionage as well. And on top of that, a totalitarian country. The Five Eyes, certainly friends and acting in our interest, but they're still having, still being the biggest software producers, and they're still having a strong interest and legal requirements for backdoors in their technologies as well. And we have other actors which are not on the agenda, and I frequently like to call on the UAE and the KSA, so Saudi Arabia and the whole region, because what happens currently in Saudi Arabia with MBS in particular is the commercial construction of a major cyber power. So they're getting very, very effective in offensive cyber, may even be among the top 3 already, very unnoticed because it's a largely industrial effort, not so much in the nation state. And they are already in control of much of the hardware production globally. So this is something that has not been researched so very well, but they may very soon develop their own offensive interests in backdoors and in weakening technologies in specific cases. And of course, we also have some concrete discussions and cases. The biggest one, of course, is Huawei and 5G. That's a discussion that is very, very widely going on in Germany with very different opinions and a lot of opinions, because Huawei, of course, is cheap. It's technologically also very advanced, and we need a good 5G network, but our economy will depend on the goodwill of China for a long time, and we are supporting a dictatorship in a very critical technology and in a very critical phase of its innovation. But there are also smaller cases on a day-to-day basis. So one other example, for example, is the German automotive sector right now, who's looking for operating systems and is now eyeing QNX as an operating system for German cars, which is a Canadian operating system. Part of the Five Eyes may have a hidden access somewhere. And while we will not expect that the Five Eyes will abuse that in our disadvantage, it may be that this secret is kind of leaked somewhere. This has happened in the past repeatedly, and then criminals may have this kind of access. We may have lost it, and it could be a critical problem for the German cars. So it would be nice to have trustworthy European sovereign technologies for these cases, and not just technologies, also a more open and active culture for innovation, also better capabilities in critical security functions. And we would certainly have the outset for that as well. We know that we have great engineers, we have big tech companies, many of which are now building IT systems. Ironically, a lot of these very innovative entities in the United States are trying to, of the big software companies, are very much trying to hire Europeans into their services because we have very good engineers, very good education. So we could do all these things ourselves, but we're just not really doing them. So the question is, do we really want that? Where do we want that? And how do we get there? So this is a bit the background of what we will discuss today. We will ask ourselves why and where do we need digital sovereignty? Which technologies do we actually require? Who could be a trusted European supplier of those technologies? How can we build them? Who needs to create which kinds of incentives? And I'm now very much looking forward to my fabulous panel to discuss this with. I will not introduce them because I always prefer if panelists introduce themselves quickly. And I will start the round of introductions by asking, first of all, for your introduction of yourself, and then by asking also for a little definition of digital sovereignty. And we will start with Robert, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for invitation and a very good introduction by you, Sandro. My name is Robert Kozla. I'm Director of Department of Cybersecurity in the Chancellery of the Prime Minister in Poland. Of course, our responsibility is to take care about our investment in modern digital economy. So, of course, not forget about cybersecurity aspects. So. Today's topic about digital sovereignty, we have a lot of discussions starting with where we participate actively as a member state, starting with federated cloud environment, the new secure and digitally sovereign federated European cloud, supporting development of modern economy, of course, take into consideration different scenarios representing different industries. This is the area where we are going also to invest from IPSAE mechanism. What's more, of course, this is a question of development, the level of development from European perspective. I'm responsible and my department is responsible for recovery and resiliency plan in Poland for the cybersecurity component. Of course, our focus is on development of trusted cloud services based on the recent investment of the Polish government to have more resilient cloud services available for citizens and also companies. You ask about definition of sovereignty. And I think we can look at this definition, at least from my perspective, I'm looking at this as something like a controlling influence. So sovereign digital sovereignty, from my perspective, it's a question of governance. It's a question of impact. It's and the way how we can influence the digital market, especially in Europe, digital single market, through facilitation, directions, and of course financing the major activities to develop this market. So I think that would be the first introduction statement from my side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Excellent definition, and we'll come back to you because you're the only politician on this panel, so you will have to take care of the politics part. I will now hand over to Werner, who I know is a fanatic in digital sovereignty. Werner, please introduce yourself and give us your definition of digital sovereignty.
Thanks a lot, Sandro. Thank you for having me. My name is Werner Strasser. I'm the founder and CEO of Fragmentic Storage Solutions here in Austria. Actually, as Sandro already mentioned, I'm a kind of fanatic about digital sovereignty, which has been made me have these kind of caps from my marketing department. Actually, of course, it is a question of, let's say, paradigms. We somehow have to synchronize our semantic understanding of the term of digital sovereignty. Of course, I agree with just about everything that Robert mentioned before. And our focus, of course, is not only to stay in, let's say, the political sphere of a definition. Actually, our goal, our approach is way stronger to make it possible for the individual, for the small, medium enterprise, for the larger enterprise, and even, of course, also for governments to have a chance, a technology-driven chance to achieve digital sovereignty by themselves and to retain it. So in my understanding, and that's maybe the reason why I'm not a politician, I prefer to trust on math and on science and not so much on rules. And so for us, digital sovereignty is actually something that is, of course, not only by technology, but in our point of view, mainly achievable by having technology solutions to enable the individual and the SME, actually the citizen, and all the larger constructs of human people to achieve this kind of sovereignty.
Thank you, Werner. And I will now hand it over to Cyril, who is a representative of a large European company.
Hello, Cyril Dujardin. I'm in charge of digital security in Atos. Digital security covers the cyber security part of it and the national security, as we see a lot of convergence, and the convergence of cyber and national security is valid not only for sovereign topic. I will not challenge the definition of sovereign. What I would say is for a large IT company like Atos, sovereignty, digital sovereignty is kind of schizophrenic because in one way, our customers are asking for the control of what they are, of their data, of their information, of their processes, of everything. So they're asking for sovereignty. But on the other end, they want to get the service, the optimal service. They want to get something that is useful for them, being in digital overall or in cybersecurity. And of course, the first role of cybersecurity is to protect. So they would like both to be protected, but to be protected at a level that allows them to be in control and not to be dependent on other third parties. So sometimes as a supplier, we have to manage this schizophrenic view on is the medicine worse than the disease, and we have to really deal with that in our handling with our customers.
Thank you, Cyril. So now finally, I'd like to hand it over to Sergey, who is joining us from Palo Alto Networks.
Thanks, Sandro, and thanks for having me back at this conference. So my name is 𝗀𝗏𝗄. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Central Europe at Palo Alto Networks for the last 2 years. And previously, I used to run cyber defense in one large DAX 30 company. And I guess, if you ask me on the definition on digital sovereignty, I would say most people agree that, in any global economy and hyper-connected world, free and secure flow of data is very important in order to stay competitive, right? So the answer cannot be that we build everything ourselves. I mean, I'm not aware of any big product in any country where everything is done just by this specific nation. And I think looking also, at the most promising digital natives here in Germany, like Zalando's, Delivery Heroes, Volocopters of this world, I think they're all as well interconnected with the digital system, right? So I guess every organization has to understand what is the true value add in the system and how to, how to create this value add and not to reinvent the entire wheel. And I would say Mr. 𝗀𝗏𝗄, he put the right challenge in his keynote on the table, really to, asking us how we create trust in this system and what is really trusted and what not. And also I like the definition of influence, trustfulness, where certainly a lot of perspectives can be given, like reliability, security, privacy, self-determination. But I guess in the end, this cloud tech, where the data is not necessarily anymore bound to location, is something where we all have to learn how to protect this data, the consumers and as well the vendors. So let me try to reflect what we hear from our customers, who are in particular very sensitive about digital sovereignty. And these customers seeking first of all for more transparency, right? So we've tried to respond to that, for example, and provide really insight on how we're driving our supply chain, how we're manufacturing chips, where they're manufactured, how they're sealed, how they are really delivered to the customers, how we check the integrity afterwards, insights on our internal security, insights on the right really to handle the data, whether the data is stored in Europe or in the US. So I think these are the first aspects which are being asked. And my definition of digital sovereignty would be, in context of cybersecurity specifically, that you have to have the capabilities to validate the trustfulness and trustfulness of the organization, but also of the technology, right? And all these transparency initiatives I've just mentioned, but also others like technical validations or even certifications. There are a lot of great initiatives like C5, ANSI, or SOC 2.0, where you can ask large vendors to provide insights over hundreds of reports, of pages actually in reports, to describe how security is being managed across these companies. Another example from the automotive sector is, for instance, that they've created or come up with a separate certification as well, which is called TISAX, which they've trying now to adopt or force as large manufacturers across the entire supply chain. So I think from their point of view, it's also part of the digital sovereignty to ensure that all the suppliers are being properly secured. So that's one view. And I think a second view is what we hear very often is that digital sovereignty is also something about trust into the technology. I think we had already a discussion last year on the panel here. While we can trust an organization, I think technology remains far too complex to be trusted, simply because we are all interconnected and there could be a lot of systematic risks which we don't understand. SolarWinds supply chain attacks we've seen in the past are just one small aspect of this iceberg. So I guess it shows us that even the most advanced companies out there can be compromised, and therefore we in cybersecurity are always, referring back to a strategy of zero trust architecture. So really trying to reduce the trust as much as possible, and always verify this technology. And specifically our customers, who are using insecure technology, having a lot of technical debt, which they cannot change, they're seeking for compensating measures to, have a permanent layer of verification of such technologies, or even understanding how they can decouple that from the system by, controls like segmentation and so on. So in simple words, if you can't trust the technology, and you don't really want to change it, or you can't change it, I think you can create always successful compensating measure for that part.
Thank you, Sergey. And I think you very nicely turned back to the overall topic of the conference, which Wolfgang Ischinger already mentioned yesterday, namely trust. So trust, as he said, is the most important ingredient in diplomacy, also because you cannot really verify what's in the mind of your other nation's counterpart. But I think in IT, as you already mentioned, we also have this concept of zero trust or trustworthy. So trustworthy, that's also an interesting philosophical distinction, by the way. Trust is something that I deliver in advance and as a belief in something. Trustworthy, on the other hand, is something that I can actually verify and validate. So if somebody or a system is trustworthy, I can actually verify its particular characteristics which are relevant for that. So I think the question for us is, since our trust has been shaken every now and then in Europe in some of these systems and in their reliability, functionality, and some of the security aspects, are there any areas where we actually need trustworthy technologies rather than trust into a vendor? And is that something that we can generate by rules, by setting up a law, or is a law not sufficient? And do we have to actually gain control of the architecture of the technological development process itself? So this is something I would like to discuss with you now, and I think I would first like to ask Cyril what a large company like Atos where would you consider parts where rules are sufficient, where trust is sufficient, which level of trust, where is trustworthy required? What's Atos' position?
Yeah, I think from what Sergey told us, it's quite clear we have to differentiate some technologies and some level of let's say, of technology that needs to be sovereign, that needs to be trusted but you can't rely on the sum of product to be fully, let's say, secure, trusted. So you need to really look at the overall environment, not coming from the let's say the hardware software system to have the full view. So what we believe is that you need to secure or to highlight a certain number of technology around cryptography, around digital identity, let's say artificial intelligence, which is a big word, but we need also to have some trust on it. I'm talking also about quantum, where the future-proof technology that will be at the base of, let's say, quantum-proof technology, let's say, deciphering of non-quantum-proof technology and the use for advanced cryptography. So we need to have this basis capacity to be able to be offered to our, let's say, not only our government, because government is only one layer. Of course, the fundamental and the most, let's say, trustful layer in our world, at least in our Western world, still. But also for any company, I think we are sometimes, let's say, we are sometimes separating the need for let's say, government and critical site from the need of corporate. But more and more, these two worlds are merging, are converging, and we really need to, because when you were talking about a car manufacturer, okay, cars can become weapons, so it's not anymore. You can use them, you can take control of them, and have them become weapon. If you are, let's say, in agriculture and using a phosphate nitrate, you can use it as a bomb, and you can, let's say, put it in the middle of a city and make it as a bomb. So no more. Let's say, no more separation between these two universes. So meaning we need this basic technology, then we need trusted, not trusted technology, we need trusted companies, trusted layers. Our customer are asking us to have, let's say, trustees, people that are able to build interface between this, let's say, this first layer of technology, which are the key one that we can rely on, that can be audited by the various, let's say, security bodies of our countries. Then this trusted capacity to interface this technology with the, let's say, the open world. When I say open world, why wouldn't we use the best of breed of the security of some let's say friends, some friends in the US, some friends in other countries? Why wouldn't we use this technology? Why wouldn't use the capacity of the hyperscaler to deliver fantastic, let's say, cloud capacity and transform the world we are living in digital? We should use this technology, but still we need to control this basic layer, and we need to have a trusted provider in all European providers as well in Europe, but German in Germany, that are French in France, that are let's say Dutch in Netherlands. We need to have this capacity to have these trusted parties that can make the gateway between these key technology that we need to control and develop and finance and get our hands on, and the let's say more global players of this security world.
Thank you. So, Robert, from your perspective as a government regulator, where would you like to have your own technology? So more control over what you're actually doing, and where do you think rules are sufficient, and how do you intend to validate the rules?
Yes, of course, we need laws, we need rules, and we need standards, because we need to set the stage for our collaboration with academia and industry. Of course, in this triangle, this is the only way how we can develop the trust already mentioned by our colleagues from this panel. Trust can be declared, but of course need to be can be declared, but declaration is not valid as soon as it's not proven by the by the real steps, by the real activities. So that's why, of course, from one side, we have laws regarding, of course, respect to investment, respect to the rights, legal rights, and also privacy, and of course the country rights to be sovereign, the European Union to take a role as well. On the other side, we have rules where we set the stage for industry, how to operate, how to develop products, how to deliver them, how to implement them securely. At the end of the day, of course, we have best practices that need to be followed, but need to be developed. And usually best practices should be developed together with industry. Governments are not devices and services developers. So that's why, of course, we need this partnership. On the other side, the way how we can check this trust and how we can improve this trust and really prove the trust and trustworthiness, it's starting from the softest ways. It's testing. Of course, we need to check whether the product services complies with technical specifications and standards. A second is a more formal evaluation. And finally, of course, certification. But this is ideal world, and then we know that we are not living in an ideal world. That's why, of course, in the European Union, we set the stage for a Cyber Security Act that define requirements for evaluation and certification of of the product itself. On the other side, when we look at the market from the perspective of how many products are already certified, which are the eligible criteria actually for evaluation certification, and we found a lot of gaps. Just as you refer to 5G, as you refer to the next generation of technologies, and also Cyril touched some emerging technologies that will be implemented. The basic question is how to prove that those technologies are resilient, that those technologies can be trusted, that those technologies cannot be misused. Because on one side, we are talking about rules, but the bad guys do not respect the rules. So, of course, the rules are for governments, the rules are for industry, the rules are for academia, the rules are for citizens, but not for the bad guys and politically or economically motivated gangsters. So that's why, of course, we should, and what was already also touched by Sergey about zero trust, and it's zero trust is more about philosophy, that we should assume not to trust in 100% of security solutions. That's why, of course, we need to talk about multi-level security. And when I refer to the definition of sovereignty, I talked about impact. I talked about controlling influence. So that's why this type of controlling influence can be set only in the direct partnership between government and not declarative partnership. Because we heard for at least last 10 years, we heard a lot about public-private partnership, but the examples of this successful public-private partnership, where government, of course, respect the rights and interests of companies to develop and to gain profits from their activities, and the industry respect the government's the right of the governments to regulate, to control, because of the responsibility of governments in front of their citizens. So the way how I would address the topic of trust and building the trust, I can provide you example from Poland, because in 2019, when we started to implement the NIS directive in our law, national law called Law on National Cyber Security System, we consider system as an ecosystem of government, industry, organizations, and citizens' involvement as well. So we found the need to develop this type of partnership with industry, and we set the stage for this type of effective partnership with cybersecurity cooperation program. This program was announced in October 2019. Until now, we have almost 20 companies enrolled into this program, companies and organizations, also NGOs, and we collaboratively work, first of all, to introduce the most recent and the most resilient solutions, the most resilient services. We also incorporate education for users and security baselines provided by by companies. So I think this is, we cannot, as I said, we cannot declare the trust without the real steps, and real steps require some, at least a minimum level of the rules, and then goodwill and facilitation for the effects. So that's what I wanted actually to address this in this part. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, real steps is a good step forward, I believe, and I can shift this over to Werner, because I know for him, real steps would be mainly technology. So, and I think an interesting question is, why haven't we built more baseline technologies in Europe, in Germany? Why are we not stronger on some of the technological parts when we have such a great base of engineers, a great base of industrial tech companies? And what's wrong in the market, so to speak? And which incentives do we need, or how do we have to reshape the market to create incentives for more sovereignty on the technical level?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Sandra. Actually, I think the perspectives of a European high-tech company, in our case, a rather young startup company, even though I'm in this industry since nearly 30 years now. Of course, it is not easy always to find out who has a real interest in this game. When we talk about cybersecurity, it's actually also, of course, a way or one of the aspects of asymmetric hybrid warfare. And it's maybe not in the consciousness of the broader public, but actually we are all affected by that. And of course, there are several levels to this problem. And so maybe to start with the most obvious one, this friend-foe recognition, to find out who is your real partner. Does it change over time? And especially when we talk about political changes in all the countries and all the blocks we've mentioned today, it's getting somehow tricky. And maybe one way to better understand this is somehow the, let's say, historical view. And when we go back some 20 years, I just remember the former CIA director, James Woolsey, very bluntly and directly told to, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, and then later on it was reprinted here at Spiegel and some other newspapers, the Zeit, why we are spying on you, because you are actually, you are bribing, and so actually European technology is not really worth spying on it, because you are not advanced enough. So somehow at that point, this was very blunt, some 20 years ago. But of course, I think we still have to be very clear here that being the newest kid in town, the new bloc, the EU, actually, we need to have some more, maybe a little bit more solid spine on that. And so I'm fully aware that it makes a big difference if you are living and working in a small neutral country like here in Austria, or if you live in a larger, maybe more fully integrated NATO member country and so on. And so I'm pretty convinced that it's not only the set of skills that makes a difference in who can really develop and produce baseline technology. It's also, of course, a question of the, let's say, economic and political will to do it. And one aspect of this game, which is actually very frustrating, not so much for us here at the moment, but to see this in the last 10 to 15 years. A lot of very interesting technologies were developed. A lot of very interesting organizations actually have been founded. And when it came to market readiness, when it came to the situation where other countries, other blocs, would definitely do public procurement of this technology and support these baseline sovereignty technologies. Actually, the Europeans used to step on their own toes, have a lot of regulations. Of course, it's taxpayer money. Of course, there needs to be a whole set of rules to avoid corruption. But nevertheless, if you have too many rules or rules that actually stop you by developing to develop things like that, it's getting actually very tricky. And just let me answer to the former question also. When it comes to the comparison between trusting in rules and regulations and laws. I fully agree with Robert that, of course, these regulations are necessary. I just want to stress the point that it is not enough. It definitely is not enough. You have to mitigate these challenges by adopting technology, adopting science, physics, maths in a way that enables you to have all the layers of protection to have a chance to achieve sovereignty. And so, for instance, just the historic example, 𝗬𝗏𝗰𝗂𝗏, 42 years ago at MIT, published his first paper on secret sharing, which is actually an old mathematical algorithm in the meantime, but nevertheless, it helps us protect against future quantum computers. And so actually, I think it's not so much only a question of economic situation or political situation. It's also a question of, are we really interested as a society to achieve digital sovereignty? And who probably wants to have it, who is responsible to have it, and who maybe pretends but isn't really interested in it. And so I think this is a very tricky situation. And of course, yeah, when we just think about things like the US Cloud Act of 2018, there is a lot of, I don't want to say this bad word, but there's a lot of strange arguments out there. And if you really read the text and understand the meaning, you should think about, or we have to think about, if we really want to achieve digital sovereignty, or if we should stop pretending it.
Yeah, thanks, Werner. Okay, so I have a question from the audience, which relates to what you said, Werner, because of course we know that especially in Europe, one larger problem is governments and regulations. So it's frequently seen to be a roadblock for innovation, and something that rather complicates things than enabling them. And this fits nicely to the question that we're having from the audience, namely, how can governments and companies work together to secure stability and reliability, even to fight those gangsters, as Robert just said? And I'd like to ask that question to Sergey, especially with a look to the United States. Are there maybe lessons that we can learn from the United States over here in Europe regarding the cooperation of private and public? Or are you guys just as bad as we are?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely lessons to learn everywhere, and specifically, in the sector of PPPs, public-private partnerships. I think the US, as you've asked a specific example, invested very early on by creating certain sharing alliances, right? All the different ISACs, so information sharing alliances. For instance, they have a ISAC in the financial space, then there's an energy side ISAC, and so on. They've been created and made with a structure that both the private and public sector cooperate. And also exchange not just operative threat intelligence, but also a lot of insights on tactics, on best practices, on countermeasures, and so on. I think we do have very, very solid first steps. We went, pushing as well our countries in this direction. There are great examples, again, here in Germany with, CSSA, or DCSO, in the UK with Cyber Defense Alliance, for instance, in the financial sector space. But I guess the partnership between the public and the private sector is still very, very weak compared to the US. And this has as well some other aspects, simply because in the US, it's very common that you would swap as an individual during your career between the private and public sector, and by that already get a much more better understanding for the other world, right? In the public sector, things are working completely different than the private sector. I do not see this too often in Europe, unfortunately. I think, therefore, these two sectors remain very often isolated or not well understood. While I guess the problems, the set of problems in both sectors is the same, and a partnership would definitely create much more better results in that aspect. And perhaps one quick comment as well to the previous question on how to build specifically or try to to support and subsidize basically this digital sovereignty in Europe as well. A couple of days ago, I've looked up for the venture funding which went into the cybersecurity space during the last year. And this is pretty much related because I think a lot of this innovation is not happening just top down from the government to the industry, but also from the industry to the government, right? Being presented as an idea. And last year, there were more than 7.8 billion invested into cybersecurity, and 76% of the spending went to the US companies, 20% to Israel. So 96% of funding, and out of this 96% of funding, 85% of funding was seed funding, so new companies being created that went to these countries, right? And what does it mean for us, right? Having such a scenario, it means that there's definitely a lot of money. Having worked in the financial industry, I can say money finds always, the right company if you present the right problem and if you start to work on this problem very early on. So I guess the challenge here is not really not throwing money on the sector. I think we need really to try to focus on the problem and not the symptoms. So having, first of all, a proper plan how we grow the cyber skills, right? I think there's a clear misalignment between the formal education and the private sector demands in that space. So creating more professorships position, investing more in research. On the other hand, trying to create the demand as well for cybersecurity in Europe, simply because we are lacking very often the awareness and have to learn the hard way before the hacks is happening. And I think that's something where we can also be a bit creative. Bettina Dice yesterday from Allianz, she was presenting as well the concept of cyber insurances. And I think that could be, for instance, such a tool or instrument to say, hey, let's make cyber insurances mandatory for every company. And by that, guarantee a free assessment for the companies who do not have this risk understanding, right? And who understand then that they have to pay more. So creating this demand, creating this market will also help to mature the cybersecurity community. And then in the end, you have, as a final step, just to create the right environment for founders. I think it's still challenging in some of the European countries in terms of taxation and so on for founders who are taking more risk, really to get these benefits from more risks, right? So that's also a problem which remains not just in cyber world, but of course for all the startups and founders in the space. So I think the good news is the money is there and always finds its way. So we have just to focus really on the foundation.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Unfortunately, there would be a lot to discuss, but we're at the end of our time and we're now entering into the coffee break. I'm surprised though and excited to see that we're actually having a lot more alignment on those topics of digital sovereignty these days than just a few years ago. We can really see that the discussion has matured quite a lot, that several of the ideas are getting much more concrete, and that we're also getting support from the United States and other countries to develop more sovereignty in Europe. So this, I believe, is also in the spirit of what Wolfgang Ischinger said at the beginning, that more digital sovereignty in Europe is not a situation that creates competition, but rather something that enhances opportunities for cooperation. So in that spirit, I'd also like to thank you, dear panel members, for joining. It was a privilege to have you. Thank you very much. And now everybody enjoy the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this panel on digital sovereignty. Thank you, Sandro Geiken. Thank you, Robert Kostler, Werner Strasser, Cyril Dujardin, and Sergey Epp. After our short coffee break, I will introduce and hand over to Oliver Roloffs, the co-founder of the Munich Cyber Security Conference. Hi, hello, and
Hi,
good to have you here finally.
Yes.
So the stage is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this kind handover, Sabina. And before we enter the coffee break, I just wanted to highlight again a really thrilling initiative which sounds really very promising, and I think also brings more power into the question of digital sovereignty. It's a new network, 𝗀𝗄𝗰𝗄𝗏, which you can see now in the display, a new great network of Europeans or Europe's security makers and safety clusters. Here we see them again, and now let's listen to the great music before we come back after the coffee break. Welcome again, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. For years now, the Munich Cyber Security Conference and its speakers have been standing for content-rich contributions and debates that offer great added value to the cybersecurity community and beyond. Our next speaker will now continue this aspiration, and I welcome 𝗀𝗲𝗰𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗿, who's the 𝗀𝗲𝗰𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂 Chair of Cybersecurity and Senior Cyber Scholar at the US Naval College in Newport. So welcome, 𝗀𝗲𝗰𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁. I'm really very keen to listen to your presentation, and I'm sure that the audience is doing either.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is
You are now muted.
follow on one of the comments that was made in the previous panel by 𝗧𝗂𝗰𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗂𝗁𝗂, that we needed to focus on the foundation. I'm going to take that a step further and make an argument that we can't just focus, we have to build on something. And I'm going to make a point to you that today we need a collective operational cyber defense, and that we can do it. It is feasible and it's urgent. And I will end with a suggestion on one I'm working on called the Cyber Operational Resilience Alliance. I think we have to understand that the world has changed, and cyber's insecurities is a phenomenal contribution to why the distribution of power and influence in this world moved away from us. And we have to adapt. We know that cyber can have strategic effects without risking conflict. We have to recognize that we built this extraordinarily insecure substrate, and we spread it everywhere, giving offense advantages to everyone and changing the systemic surprise in all of our own complex systems. And authoritarian adversaries, notably China, have exploited it. We created a new kind of conflict, cyber conflict, which is in part and parcel because we in the democracies have been fragmented and delayed in the response to these insecurities. And now we've created what I'm calling great systems conflict. This is the rise of the peer states that are actually arguing and conflicting across cyberspace using cyber means. We're also creating borders in cyberspace. So we're trying desperately to defend ourselves as individual democracies. And a better way to define this is as jurisdictions, right? And so as a consequence, we need to build something across the democracies. And organizations here are critical, not talking. And I argue, and I will show you at the end, a cyber operational resilience alliance, I call it 𝗀𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗂, that needs to be built, that includes our private sector and allows us to protect ourselves in the near term as we build more strongly in the long term. All right, first off, let's just get some history done. Cyberspace, 2010, this is the kind of picture I would have shown you straight out of Wikipedia. Very clean, very neat, easy to see. Here's 2021. The same picture is covered with clouds, but they're not just clouds, they're commercial private clouds in which the programming itself is not obvious to those of us who are looking at it on the outside. Another picture, 2010, we would have talked about the various stacks, the machine stack, the internet stack. Up here, we would have talked about the autonomous systems of BGP. Today, we have to talk about a completely different, not completely different, but a much more complex set of stacks that are virtual. Yes, we have the physical and digital infrastructure down here, but now we have cloud computing owned largely by commercial firms, and in between are virtualized items, software, and then they go up to all the connected devices that we have. And of course, we have to care about whether they're hybrid clouds, and artificial intelligence is changing this, as well as quantum computing or computation in this case. Another kind of stack we have to worry about now is what's called the artificial intelligence stack. It has different things in there: massive data management, decision supports, but machine learning, and all the forms of different kinds of computation that before were buried or in research. Before, in 2010, we would talk about these lovely cable networks, and still 98% of the global internet runs through these networks. But at that time, it was pretty easy to follow them. Now, this is what it looks like. Now it's complex. Everyone is building it. Google is building their own. We have a different world where it's moving away from the hands of the democracies. And what are the democracies doing? Well, they're doing what the adversaries are doing. We're creating jurisdictions. We are trying to make ourselves individually defensible and defended. And part of the reason we're doing that is we have been losing 1 to 2% of our GDP annually to cyber insecurity. That's not sustainable, by the way. So what's happening? The future is coming very, very fast. A lot has been said about the China Belt and Road program, but now we have the China, of course, the digital Belt and Road, and we're seeing them throughout the world. The Chinese scale allows them to be in places that they couldn't have been before, right? And that scale allows them to change the world, whether we want them to do it or not. There's another picture. This comes out of the some Australian researchers, the 7 major firms of China, and what they're involved in all over the world. So whether you want them to do something or not, they have the means to be at the bottom of that stack and change the world around you. And these are the kinds of things they're involved in. Smart cities, surveillance, and all sorts of data centers, particularly data centers, cables, all sorts of their positioning on a lot of cables, satellite calibration centers. Their Chinese version of GPS, Baidu, is of course now present throughout the world. And curiously enough, the satellite likes to geoposition above the capitals of other countries. Their westernized influence that we used to have is declining as they spread out. In 2006, only 1 firm amongst the largest telecommunications firms are Chinese. By 2014, 4 of the 7 were Chinese. 2020, Huawei is clearly the largest telecommunication vendor globally, and Chinese firms are beginning, you might say they are beginning to own a continent, Africa, where Huawei has built at least 70 4G networks, and it's holding them hostage for 5G, and China Mobile is absolutely dominant. Now we know that the Chinese government has actually decided now it's time for them to have a new internet. Not one that enables a free and open internet, but one where you have to register to use it and you can be shut off. And still, we're not listening. This is a wonderful headline from CNET. You know, China has big ideas for the internet, but too bad nobody likes them. Well, who exactly is no one? All of Africa, the Middle East, good part of Asia, they seem to like it just fine. A couple of years ago, a colleague and I, 𝗀𝗏𝗂𝗏 from the University of Tel Aviv, we did some research on BGP hijacking through China Telecom. Very nice. At that time, China Telecom had 10 points of presence inside North America. Now they have over 2,500 points of presence throughout the world. This kind of behavior is absolutely possible anywhere that they're present. So whose preferences will actually dominate this future cyber world that we're talking about? Whose preferences will dominate its governance and the control in each of these layers? Will it be us? No. Will we be able to control who is doing it? Well, one thing we have to look at is the fact that we may not even have the funds to compete if we do not combine our funds in some way. And we anticipated that Chinese economy would equal the US economy by 2030, maybe somewhere around then. So good argument to be made that in 2014, it already equaled the US economy by using GDP, PPP measures. And by 2019, it was already 20% larger. And this was before the losses of coronavirus. So we have to adapt to this reality. And in this reality, the Chinese scale and coherence is absolutely going to defeat any single one of the democracies that you live in or you like. We are, in the world terms, a minority community. We have preferences, but the rest of the world is not sharing them. So we need to think about what future we want. Do we want the future we're going to have if we do nothing? Do we want the future that we're going to have if each of us makes our own jurisdictions in cyberspace and desperately tries to defend? What I call it the difference between rising vassaldom and some more slowly rising vassaldom. We can't go back to where we were. We'll never have that ability. But what we can do is we can make our systemically across our community, we can make the strategic coherence and achieve the scale necessary to resist and actually provide an alternative model. So what we need is a new narrative. We have to recognize we're a minority community, and we have 3 operational goals, not talk, but operational goals. The first one is that we scale up, and we have the people to do that. We have at least 1 billion people that we can bring into this. And we bring in our private sector. And this becomes our democratic IT. Thank you, Sandro, for that title. That becomes our community, our democratic IT. And we buy time immediately. We start collectively defending, of course, it's sharing information, but with our private sector inside the tent. Now, what does the private sector get from this? You do not have to, inside the tent, you don't have to compete head-to-head with the Huaweis of the world. You can compete internationally as you like. You can export internationally as you like. Huawei cannot own parts of that stack inside the tent. And finally, absolutely not the least item, the most important item is on a wartime level of investment, we have to transform the underlying substrate, the underlying very shoddy cyberspace we began with, and on which all of your artificial intelligence and everything else is going to rest. We have to transform it into what we meant it to be. So we need the kind of R&D across universities, labs, and firms to change it into that securable substrate we meant for it to be. And only then can we turn to the rest of the world and say democracy can be prosperous, vigorous, and united, and provide an alternative counterstory to the China model. Now, at the moment, I'm working on a piece of research. I know there are many ideas about how we correlate, how we can come together collectively. But I'm working on a model that was built on the 5 offense advantages that we originally gave to the world and caused the problem from the start with the shoddy cyberspace. And this is the cyber conflict model. And what I'm working on right now is a cyber operational resilience alliance that is inserted into the model, and it begins to break these connections for us. Right? And I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like to. But in the meantime, let me come to the end. This is our reality. There's no assured future for us in this deeply cybered, authoritarian world of great systems conflict unless we hang together. And as Franklin said, if we don't hang together across allies and even internally, we will most certainly hang separately. Okay. And thank you very much. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this very inspiring presentation that provided us with a lot of food for thought. Maybe one quick question back to you, as you recently warned against a split of the US Cyber Command from the NSA, that you warned that would create silos and is not a good idea. Can you briefly tell us why it isn't a good idea?
Why silos are not a good idea. This is the question?
Exactly. Because we have the same situation.
Hard to imagine why silos would be a good idea under these circumstances. If I understand, are you talking about silos within the community of democracies? Because fundamentally, we share more in terms of values, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of our expectations than we do not share. And we are a minority community. I mean, if you look across the world, we spent 70 years telling ourselves we ran the rest of the world, and we did not turn them into consolidated democracies. We are bizarrely sui generis, and we share values that are markedly different than the rest of the world. It makes us hard to, easy to kill and hard to defend sometimes. So silos, when you have a silo, operationally,
hey Brooks, welcome.
Very good. Thank you so much, Chris. And that was a statement. Silos are really still a problem in the cybersecurity world. And Chris Demchak's vantage point is the perfect connecting passage in terms of how scale can defeat scale in terms of cybersecurity and cyber attacks. And new technologies will play an increasingly important role in the future to achieve this goal. An answer to this challenge is provided by Deep Instinct. Deep Instinct, the New York-based cybersecurity company, has outpaced conventional security technologies which often come to use when it's too late. Founded in 2015, Deep Instinct has developed an AI-based deep learning technology to preventively combat malware, and the company just raised 100 million in a recent funding round led by BlackRock. That's really huge. How deep learning can be a game changer in cybersecurity, we'll know here in my interview with Brooks Wallace, Vice President Sales for Europe of Deep Instinct, live today from Windsor Castle. Thank you, Brooks, for joining us today in front of such an impressive background.
Oliver, thank you for having me. Yes, I'm speaking to you live from Windsor Castle, where the sun just came out and is making my appearance rather shaded. I apologize for that, but I'm excited to be here. It looks like you're having a great conference. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Brooks. We'll come later to the bright and dark sides of shades also in cyberspace. But Brooks, no doubt COVID-19 has tremendously impacted the cybersecurity area and requires the next level of security technologies. My first question is, how can deep learning change the game for more cybersecurity?
Oliver, you're right. Overnight, businesses around the world have changed the way they operate. Suddenly, millions of office workers are working remotely, many using their personal smartphones, laptops, and tablets for business, often over unsecured, dirty home environments. This perfect storm has put massive strain on already limited IT resource in most organizations, leading to alert fatigue and burnout, and ultimately missed critical security alerts and incidents. You know, the FBI actually says that cyber attacks increased by more than 400% since the start of the pandemic. What most people see or read about really is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, the status quo approach to security that we're used to up till now is now antiquated. It's reactive and has become insufficient. Over 80% of successful breaches today are leveraging new, unknown, zero-day attacks. The need for disruptive innovation in this space is now. Security professionals are crying out for change, and this is where deep learning comes in. The biggest problem in security was and still is prevention. Deep Instinct is the first and only deep learning cybersecurity framework that was purpose-built for the prevention of cyber attacks. Deep learning technology and its ability to constantly adapt and protect against the ever-changing threat landscape allows us to stop unknown, never-seen-before threats in less than 20 milliseconds, with a false positive rate of less than 0.1%. Now, that's the lowest in the industry. In fact, we're so confident in deep learning that we have backed up our technology with the industry's only low false positive guarantee and the highest ransomware defense warranty of $3 million, backed by, you'll be happy to hear, Munich Re.
That sounds really interesting. Also, a brilliant technology behind that. If we take a look on the very varying cyber landscape, the cyber threat landscape, what trends do you see emerging in terms of new technologies such as AI? You mentioned deep learning, and how will the industry adapt?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is traditional cybersecurity companies are using conventional technologies and machine learning to focus on detection and remediation because they can't prevent attacks early in the attack chain. With other cybersecurity technologies, attacks need to execute and run before they are picked up, and then check to see if they are malicious, sometimes taking up to 60 seconds by too late. Deep learning allows us to predict and prevent unknown and known attacks before they can execute, meaning before they can write to memory or disk without connecting to the cloud. It works autonomously. And this is very powerful because time matters. Deep learning, I think, is what we're talking in terms of your question, is deep learning has been around for some time. It's applied by Tesla to autonomous vehicles, by YouTube and Netflix to their recommendation engines, and companies like Amazon to image recognition. But the entry to deep learning is high. It involves elite data scientists, requires fast computing power, and using GPUs that working on large volumes of raw data. At its core, deep learning leverages deep neural networks that can solve tasks like machine learning can't. Machine learning requires a human domain expert to define and engineer features for the machine to learn. Deep learning learns from millions of files of raw data without any direction or interface from humans. The result is deep learning is far more accurate than machine learning. Best of all, there is no feature engineering, so it's harder for malware to understand how to overcome us. And despite all this huge computing power that I mentioned, the actual footprint required is tiny. So you truly have the best of both worlds.
Thank you, Brooks. Let's conclude with the bright and dark side of the cyberspace I mentioned before. Attackers and defenders are rapidly using AI-based technologies. Who will win the race?
Great question. Yeah, it's a game of cat and mouse. It's really a war of attrition. I think we have to assume that some attackers are ahead of the good guys. Nation states have formed small armies under strict discipline to focus on stealing money, government secrets, and being disruptive. Staying at that bleeding edge of innovation is the only way to outpace the attackers. AV, next-gen firewalls, EDR, EPP were themselves bleeding edge technologies, all considered game changers by the industry at their time. That time has passed. It's now time for the next wave of cybersecurity powered by deep learning. We say if you can't change the game, change the rules, and deep learning is allowing us to do just that.
Great, thank you. If you can't change the rules, change the game. And that's what I really like, and I'm convinced that deep learning will contribute enormously to take the next level of cybersecurity with Deep Instinct, a rising star in the cybersecurity realm. Thank you very much, Brooks, and please say hi to the Roll family.
She's in today. I'll give her your best regards. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a virtual hand to Brooks Wallace from Deep Instinct and come to another really very famous spot we traditionally have at this Munich Cyber Security Conference. Beside the famous spot on, it's always one of the highlights of this conference and offers controversial debates with popcorn quality. Our famous Talking Heads edition, this time moderated by Gregor Schmitz, the editor-in-chief of 𝗥𝗲𝗁𝗲𝗿, one of the major media outlets in southern Germany. So we very much look forward to this year's Talking Heads with very exciting speakers. I say goodbye and hand over again to our conference moderator, 𝗧𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗁𝗂𝗏, after the coffee break, which will come after the talking points. So, saying this, it is now high time for the talking heads. Gregor, please take over. So I see Gregor is not online yet, so let's wait another minute. Okay, and I hear now.
Now I should be visible. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Hey, welcome, Gregor. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Oliver. I was IT trouble, so this is fitting. Well, thanks so much for having me. My name is 𝗥𝗲𝗁𝗏𝗏. I'll be hosting this panel. I have hosted it a few times in the past. I never really noticed that it's really called Talking Heads, the section, which is fitting because it's one of my favorite bands, and one of the favorite albums is called Stop Making Sense. I'm going to try to do the very opposite now, trying to make sense here on this panel when it comes to the very much changing environment of IT security. And I'm pretty sure we're going to make sense because we have assembled a stellar cast of characters again on this panel. Some of them have been stalwarts of this conference for a number of years and don't really need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce them nevertheless very briefly. We have Alex Stamos here, who has been with us a number of times over the years. He just told us that he would love to come to Munich in February, so maybe next year it will be possible again. He is now with Stanford. He has been a chief security officer, both at Facebook and Yahoo. He's spoken on 6 continents, holds 5 patents, so what else is there to say? But what I like about him in his bio is that he's always referred to as the Forrest Gump of InfoSec by friends. So that is I think, a title that everyone should aspire to. I'm not sure that Thomas 𝗀𝗏𝗃 is going to be called the Forrest Gump of Deutsche Telekom. I hope not, but he's definitely the go-to guy for IT security at Deutsche Telekom, where he has been working for a number of years, and he's in charge of everything related to IT security. So welcome, Thomas. And we have Bruce Schneier, who also doesn't need an introduction. He's with the Kennedy School of Government, my alma mater. So hi to Cambridge. He's actually flying back to Cambridge, I think, for the first time this weekend. He hasn't been there in a long time. And he just told me that I shouldn't worry about Harvard because Harvard has more money than God, even in the corona crisis. So hi, Bruce. He has written a number of books. I think the most outstanding one, or the most happening one, is still the one with the title "Click Here to Kill Everybody." And how is this panel going to work? We're going to have a very brief introduction or opening remarks by Bruce. He doesn't share his presentation because he just told us that no one wants to see PowerPoint now on Zoom. So it's going to be a very brief chat, basically, at the beginning. Then we're going to discuss here for 20 minutes on the panel, and then we want to open it up to questions. You can write questions to the moderator or to the editors. Please remember that a question has a question mark at the end. It shouldn't be a statement, even when we are online. And now the floor is yours, Bruce. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So, Alex, I think you and I should host a conference on an Antarctic cruise ship so we can have spoken on 7 continents. That really seems like a good idea. I don't know if the penguins want to hear what we have to say, but I don't know. Maybe they'll listen more than other people we speak to. I actually want to make 3 points. Actually, first I want to say that it's really nice to be with everybody, and I truly wish we could be together in person and hope that next year we are again having conferences. I'm jealous of the Australians who have licked COVID so well that they are having in-person conferences. So I want to make 3 points about security. I think it's really relevant right now. The first is that that patching is failing as a security paradigm. I mean, patching is how we get security. The reason this object, our phones and our computers, are as secure as they are, for 2 reasons. There's a team of engineers at Apple and Microsoft and Google designing to be secure, and those same engineers are available to quickly and effectively push security patches down to our phones and computers when a new vulnerability exploit is discovered. That ecosystem doesn't work for modern low-cost embedded systems like home routers or DVRs. They're built at a much lower profit margin offshore. They don't have dedicated security teams associated with them. And a lot of them can't be patched. I mean, right now, the way you patch your home router is you throw it away and buy a new one. That's the patch mechanism. But that actually does work. The life cycle of our phones and computers is what? 3 years. That also isn't true for low-cost embedded systems. You're going to replace your, DVR every 5 to 10 years. Your refrigerator every 25 years. I bought a new thermostat 2 years ago. I expect to replace it never. And that is a security issue. And if you think about it, you buy a car today. So let's make it up. The software is 2 years old. You buy it, drive for 10 years, sell it. Someone else buys it. They drive for 10 years. They sell it. Probably at this point, it gets put in a boat, sent to Africa or Latin America, where someone else buys it, drives another 10 to 20 years. All right. So you try to find a computer from 1979. Try to boot it up. Try to make it work. We have no idea how to maintain 40-year-old consumer software. Right? There's a reason Apple, Microsoft depreciate operating systems. So this notion of patching, which is really the mainstay of security right now, is going to start failing as all of these non-computer devices come online. Second thing I see failing is authentication. And authentication kind of only just barely ever worked. Human memorizable passwords just aren't good in a lot of situations. Two-factor is great, but it doesn't work in a bunch of places, and people don't like it. Backup authentication systems are terrible. But the amount of authenticating we're going to do is going to explode exponentially. Normally, authenticating is one of two things. I'm going to demonstrate them. All right, I logged into my phone with my face, and I just checked my email. I logged into a remote service. And that worked. You saw I did it really easy. But we're going to start seeing the rise of thing-to-thing authentication. Internet of Things, 5G, is not about you watching Netflix faster. It's about things talking to things behind your back. And whether it's sensors or actuators, anything in your orbit, we're going to have to authenticate them to each other. And we don't know how to do that at scale. You know, we could do that a little bit. Bluetooth works, right? I go into my car, this automatically authenticates. But I was there to set that up manually. And that's not going to work for hundreds or thousands or millions of things. The third thing that's failing is supply chain, which honestly is an insurmountably hard problem. In the past few years, we've been talking about Huawei. Right? Should we trust Chinese networking equipment? A few years before that, it was Kaspersky. Should we trust Russian antivirus equipment? And this is an important security question, right? Can you trust technology built in a country whose government you don't trust? But that is just the beginning of a very large problem. Right? This is a U.S. product, but it's not made in the U.S. Its chips aren't fabbed in the U.S. Its programmers carry, 100 different passports. And we have discovered backdoors in Juniper firewalls, D-Link routers. There have been backdoors that attempted to be put in all sorts of public domain systems on GitHub. And there's a lot. Well, you have to trust the development process, the distribution mechanism, fake apps in the Google Play Store, the update mechanism, right? NotPetya, SolarWinds, the shipping mechanism, right? The NSA stuck a backdoor into a Cisco router destined to the Syrian telephone company. In the Snowden archives, we have photographs. And this is a really hard problem. I mean, you could imagine a US-only iPhone, and it'll cost 10 times as much. No one will buy it. That we are a deeply, deeply interconnected international industry. And you have to trust every aspect of the supply chain and can't trust any of them. And we really don't have a good answer to this. And this is now increasingly an attack vector that governments and criminals are using. So that's what I want to start with, and I'd love to get into more the conversation.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce. Picking up on that, a question to you, Alex, and also Thomas. Do you think when we look at risks, what has changed because of the pandemic now? Maybe if you want to start, Alex.
Sure. So one of the things the pandemic has done is it's massively accelerated a couple of trends that we had in enterprise IT. One was flexibility around people's work conditions, right? So there's been this idea that has been embraced by a lot of companies, actually implemented correctly by a smaller number, of this idea of zero trust networks, that you could build your corporate networks in a way that being at home, being in a coffee shop, being in the office are all the same thing from a technical perspective, that you don't get any special access from being physically in the office, and that you don't lose any access or telemetry or security benefits from being out of the office. The reality is, a lot of people have talked about zero trust networking. The reality is there's only a handful of companies that really implemented it before COVID. And effectively, over a 3-month period last year, a huge number of companies had to deploy the same kind of ideas without having a plan and without having the months or years necessary to architect how to do so in a way that's non-disruptive. And so we've seen this massive change in the way that systems are managed remotely. In a lot of cases, companies don't have the kind of telemetry they used to have. So in some cases, people have been effective in saying that the same kind of security protections are in place, but in most cases not. And that's because the kind of traditional security products that we've bought, the pizza boxes that we put into a closet, in a wiring closet in an office, that allow us to get telemetry across the entire network, allow us to do net flow access or network recording or DNS aggregation. Those kinds of things don't work anymore. And there are other things you can do to try to get the same kind of security controls. And in some cases, they've been deployed, in some cases not, which has created a very complicated situation for enterprise IT.
You mentioned earlier when we talked that you are even consulting vaccine makers like AstraZeneca or so. What are they particularly concerned about when it comes to IT security?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't talk about any specific clients, but there are a number of companies, including vaccine makers and such, who are now bigger targets. And I think, you know, what we've seen over the last 6 months is a demonstration of the fact that the line that used to exist, that above this line you had to be worried about really high-end attackers who have months or years to break into your company, no longer exists, right? So like 20 years ago, the only people who had to worry about a professional intelligence team that was dedicated to attacking them was the defense industrial base, right? The Northrop Grumman's, the BAE systems and the like. And then you had oil and gas, you had telecom, you had big banks, you had big tech in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And what's happened over the last several years is that a number of groups have demonstrated the value of breaking in to a very broad swath of companies. And that's what we've learned through both the SVR attacks, including SolarWinds, as well as the attacks against 86,000 exchange servers by a Chinese group, is that that line has effectively disappeared. And we're now in a place where a very broad swath of industry needs to be prepared to play against a level of adversary that, again, was only faced by kind of defense companies 10 years ago.
Thomas, what was your experience like at Deutsche Telekom? Would you share Alex's assessment?
Yeah, I share what Alex and Bruce said before. And for me, some call it pandemia. Yeah, I call it the biggest digitization project on the planet we ever had in the history. And this shows me that we're running into a lot of problems, especially in cases where people are naively connecting their stuff to the internet. And this happened a lot just because of the need to be able to work from abroad or to work from remote out of the home office. And people who are running lazy with their IT are more in danger than ever before. So we see a new really peak of all the ransomware attacks. I have a lot of clients who got
Lisa Monaco, thank you very much for joining us at the Munich Cyber Security Forum.
So this is really a growing trend. And at the other side, and this was really a major point Bruce made before, we also see now how vulnerable are our supply chains. And it's not only because of the supply chain attacks, it's also because of the dependency of several regions of the world. What we experience is when there is a shutdown because of a pandemic in a certain region in the world, we directly see the impact 4 weeks later in Europe, for instance, as we don't get any more supply. We're now running into a chip crisis. It was driven by different factors, but it was driven by the economic war between the US and China. It's driven by the COVID crisis, and now it comes all together. And so the world is now really showing how complex we became over time. And the good question is how to deal with that in future and how to solve that and how to find solutions, especially like the example of Bruce. Yeah, I'm always using the example in my speeches, how to patch your fridge. It might not be enough just to put a CD in the deep fridge part. So we need to find solutions for that. And this shows the whole dramaturgy of the situation we are in. Yeah, so we have lost control over the existing infrastructures. We have lost control about the supply chain. So where's the way out?
So if you listen to Thomas saying that it's the biggest digitalization project in history, what is your take? Is the glass half full or half empty? I mean, are we making progress in controlling cyber risks, or are we falling farther behind?
You know, I mean, both are true. I mean, every year we get better technologies, better ideas, better security, but every year the threat also gets worse. And I mean, Alex makes a really good point. I don't know, a mid-level power company in the middle of Ohio against the Russian government just isn't a fair fight. And now we're expecting that, that level of threat. And at the same time, I think it's becoming more connected, more digitized into a lower price point, right? Where fridges and toys are not secured at the same level as computers. So things are just getting much more complicated. And risk is going up. The nation-state actors are getting more aggressive. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and the list is growing. So I think this is really becoming a national security issue in a way it didn't. We really now have to worry about interconnected toys taking down critical infrastructure. And that's really hard for policy.
Yeah. And what is your impression, maybe a question to both of you, when you talk to political actors? I mean, do you get the impression that they understand the seriousness of this challenge, that they even have the resources, the intellectual resources to grapple with these issues? Or what is your take when you talk to people in Washington or Brussels or Berlin?
I mean, no, at least, I mean, in the US, no, this is too technical, and we're still running our tech policy for the short-term financial interests of a bunch of billionaires. I mean, it's a really stupid way to run society, but it's what we do. We're not looking at broader issues.
What is your take, Alex?
Yeah, I think so things have gone a little bit better with the new administration, and that they're, under the Trump administration, we effectively had pretty much nobody working on cyber from a coordination perspective at the White House. There are a lot of good people at various agencies who were trying to do work, but there was very little leadership. We've now kind of gone completely the opposite direction, where we've gone from nobody doing cyber to everybody doing cyber in the government. And so we now have a deputy national security advisor for cyber and Neuberger. We have a new position, a national cyber coordinator. That's going to be a guy named Chris Inglis. We're going to have a director of CISA, a deputy director of CISA. The Secretary of Homeland Security is very interested in cyber. So there's actually now a lot of people who are getting their hands in the policy bucket. And we do have some movement. There is going to be an executive order that comes into the White House, maybe next week, maybe a couple of weeks from now, which is going to directly address supply chain issues for companies that sell into the federal government, as well as to start down the path of something that people like Bruce and I have been talking about for a long time, which is the idea of an agency that investigates these kinds of breaches and helps educate people of what went wrong. That's a problem that we have around the world, which is these breaches happen and there's nobody's job to come up with what the society level fixes are. We have that for airplane crashes, right? Yeah. We have it for a bunch of for when a train derails. When we have a boat gets stuck in a canal, like there's root cause analysis, but there isn't on cyber. That there at least is some movement in Washington from the White House. From our Congress, there has been nothing useful yet.
But when you talk about educating people, do you think largely academia to come up with solutions or with regards to the future of cybersecurity?
Good, Bruce.
I mean, it's less tech solutions and more policy solutions. We have a lot of tech. And the problem is we don't have the economic incentives for companies to use it. So I'm less worried about tech and I'm much more worried about policy. I need the economic incentives to change, which is changing policy.
So may I jump in here? So I don't think we need more policy here in that space. What we really need is more collaboration. Yeah, I would say even if the situation is really worse at the moment, the glass is still half full and not half empty. But look, making an easy example, when you do as a company buy some corporate sneakers, for sure you won't produce them by yourself. Yeah, you go to Nike, Adidas, or whomever to make that for you happen. But when it comes to IT, everybody feels, a computer, I'm the profession in computer and I do it all by myself. Yeah, even if I'm the world leader in producing a specific screw or whatever, they all run their own IT. And this is, I guess, the biggest failure. We need more cooperation. We need more focus also on what we're doing, what we're good in, and to bring that knowledge better together than we're doing it today. Cyber defense, for instance, is a high complex topic to deal with. And if you don't have the experts available for that, that's a battle you can't really win.
But if I understand you correctly, both Bruce and also Thomas, then every progress in law enforcement and norms and so on will fully depend on the willingness and also the incentives for the tech industry to comply with new or to abide to new security standards. How are we going to change that? I mean, you were pretty gloomy, Bruce.
Yeah, we do not have an economic system where companies willingly lose money for social benefit. That's not what we do, and we shouldn't. If we expect companies to, not employ child labor and, not buy and sell kidneys and have better cybersecurity. We actually need government regulations. That is the way we do things. Companies don't like this. Right? They don't want that. And anybody in the audience who's a company is going to tell me why we shouldn't do that. But we're not going to fix security unless we actually piss big companies off. This is no other way.
Well, Alex, you worked for some of these big companies. Is there any shift in the companies?
I mean, there has been. I think one of the issues here is we have a bunch of different security problems, actually, right? So you have big companies on the high end that are spending a lot of money on security. There are different things that they need to do in some cases to protect against this level of adversary, but they at least see it as a priority and they have an investment. And so companies that are doing okay are the ones that have threat intelligence teams, that have teams that can monitor and react in real time, that have the ability to understand what's going on in their network, that have all of their data in one place. Then we have a huge chunk of companies for which we have real issues in that they have security teams, but they're not ready to play at this level. And they're not ready for the professional team from the SVR to spend 6 months breaking in. And we don't have any really good ways to increase the leverage in those companies to take their current event. So they probably need to invest more, but even if they're spending the money, we just don't have people sitting around who have experience doing incident response against the Ministry of State Security who don't have jobs, right? Like it's not like there's a huge, so we do have to look at kind of society level things to increase capacity. And then at the small end, the real problem, something that's killing people is ransomware. And I get calls all the time, there's not much I can do from them, of companies that are important, right? Like a construction company that sells $1 billion a year that has tens of thousands of employees to go and build things, getting shut down by a ransomware attack. You're never going to have them to have a big, properly skilled security team. Like they couldn't increase their investment, but you're talking about there are thousands and thousands of firms at that size. And that's a real challenge that we're probably going to have to also really go offensive, both legally and technically, against the ransomware teams to start to make it not as profitable. Because while we can improve our protections there, realistically, there's just way too many potential victims to do so.
Thomas, have you increased your investment at Deutsche Telekom?
We do, and we spend a couple of millions every year for cyber defense, for our networks, for our infrastructure. But the problem, let me come back to the point of regulation. The problem with the regulation is that in the current regimes, we are trying to regulate at the companies who are using the technologies, but we don't see the full supply chain yet. Yeah. So when we really want to make a difference, we need to start on the vendor of a certain technology. For instance, if we as Deutsche Telekom are running a core router in our network, we are relying on the vendor to get a software update, to get a vulnerability fixed, as we don't have access to the source codes of these components. Yeah, so if we want to have here a better approach for the future, and there are some suggestions on the table in the European market, for instance, and we need to include the vendors, the ones operating the stuff, and the users as well. Yeah, so we need to care on all entities dealing with the tech. It's not only enough to talk to the operators, and this is what we mostly see in the current regulation. Yeah. So, but think about if you buying a car or whatever, there is a CE regulation in the European market, and you can simply forbid a vendor to sell its stuff if it's not meeting the requirements. But this is valid for mostly everything except IT security.
But when we talk about regulation and when we talk about the political environment, we have people here in the audience from both Europe and the US. Who do you think will be the front runner or be on the forefront in creating a legal framework? The European Commission, where you see a growing inclination to regulate big tech, or the US, where you see a similar movement, or have seen a similar movement for a number of years? And you mentioned, Alex, that there is more of an effort now by the new incoming administration. So do you think it will be a European or an American thing to curb big tech? Question to all of you who wants to jump in first.
I mean, so there's all kinds of curb big tech discussions. I mean, I think one thing people talk about is antitrust, in which there's movement in both sides, but it seems like some of that is more aggressive in Europe. There's discussions around content control. So we're never really going to have rules around content in the United States in the same way you can in Europe because of the First Amendment. So But for that area, like the most aggressive democracy is actually India. And we're seeing right now, okay, so if I was in Munich, what I'd be hearing all the time from Europeans is we need more regulation of big tech companies. I'm just going to point out, there are a lot of democracies in the world, and most of the democracies in the world do not have human rights-based protections around freedom of speech and don't have protections for the speech of political minorities. And that's what's happening right now in India, is that you have the Indian government using a legal system, using court orders to silence people who are questioning the handling of the pandemic by Narendra Modi. In fact, a man was not just silenced, but then arrested for tweeting that he was looking for oxygen for his. So we got to be real careful about when you talk about this balance of who has power over the speech of individuals, of how much of that power do you shift into governments. And the truth is that like a lot of this door was opened by NetzDG in Germany, that after Germany demonstrated we're going to have our speech rules be applied by the tech companies without lawful process on a per piece of speech basis, right? There's no court order required or anything. We're just going to push our legal requirements into the companies. We saw a huge number of countries, the Turkey, Russia, Vietnam, a bunch of countries now talk about having the same kind of controls. And that's what we're seeing in India. So, it's one thing to say the company should be smaller, but and there are like normal antitrust mechanisms for that, but we have to be really careful about the kinds of controls we put on people's speech. And because it's very difficult to decide why does Germany get to have those kinds of controls and India doesn't? There's no good way for the companies to decide which of these laws they should pass or not, or they should follow or not. And so as a result, if they're following all these local laws, you're going to end up with some pretty significant suppression of human rights.
But what is your take, Bruce? Is there no good way to curb big tech?
So separately, let's talk about security and privacy. And there we're seeing lots of pushes of government. I look to Europe first. Europe really is the regulatory superpower on the planet, and they're large enough. So GDPR, we can discuss whether we like it or not, but that's a big push towards privacy. California in the United States has state laws there. And then we are also seeing security laws. California has an Internet of Things security law. Europe is looking at that. Europe is looking at ways to regulate AI safety and security. So I think the action comes from the EU, and then in the United States from some of the states, particularly New York, Massachusetts, and California. The neat thing about good laws, Alex talked about a race to the bottom. And if you have speech suppression laws around the planet, companies trying to comply with all of them, you end up with a very bad world outcome. But for security laws, it's the opposite. Right? California has an IoT security law. One of the provisions is no default passwords. Right? Any company that sells, I would say, a thermostat is not going to have two different thermostats, one for California, one for everybody else. They're going to take out a default password and sell it worldwide. So good laws for security and privacy in a large enough market move the entire planet. When I worked for IBM, they said, we're going to implement GDPR worldwide because it's easier than figuring out who is a European. So I like seeing good security laws in big markets.
Let's talk briefly about artificial intelligence before we open it up for questions from the audience. Do you think AI is potentially a tool that is going to improve cybersecurity or not?
All right, I'm going to start because I just wrote an essay on AI hackers, which I urge people to download. Right. So the answer is we don't know. Right? There's an arms race here. And AI benefits attack, it benefits defense, and we don't know how this is going to shake out in the end. AI advances are very discontinuous. Things we think are easy are hard, things we think are hard turn out to be easy. And as technologies ratchet up, it's hard to know who's going to come out on top. Near term, I think AI benefits defense because already computers are attacking at computer speed. And we're not defending at computer speeds. And we have this skill shortage, which Alex mentioned. And the more AIs can help augment and speed up human response, we get a real near-term benefit. But long-term, your guess is as good as mine.
Thomas and Alex, your take?
Yeah, so in my view, first of all, most of the things we're calling AI these days are artificial for sure, but mostly not intelligent, yeah? So I would say it's more about machine learning we're still dealing with, and it's far away from being real AI. Nevertheless, we will enter that space, and we'll come closer and closer to that, even if it would take some time. But the challenge with that will be that attackers also using these technologies. They're also using this to adopt their mechanism. So it's an ongoing battle on the defense and on the attack side, which helping both of them. Yeah, for sure, it's helped to find the needle in the needle stack. Yeah, so we're by far not any longer searching for needles in haystacks. We're searching for needles in needle stacks. And for the attackers, it helps them to find the weak point, the single one in your huge infrastructure. And that's the challenge. And with regards to the regulation, I guess it's the wrong question to ask who is the first in doing the regulation on it, whether it's AI or whether it's IT security or IoT security. It must be more the question how to overcome that different kind of approaches, how to work closer together as we are all connected via internet connections, just some milliseconds away from each other. But we're still behaving in our regulation regime as we're really far away from each other, which is true for the physical world, but it's not true for the digital world anymore.
Alex, your brief take before we turn to the audience.
I mean, AI is a massively, there's much more artificial than intelligence in current AI. So I'm going to use the term machine learning. Machine learning is a massively overhyped from both its downsides and upsides. And so I'm not going to offer opinion because I'm not going to feed into it, to be honest. Okay,
great. That was brief in any case. So we want to open up to the audience, and there's a bunch of questions. So I'm asking you to keep your answers short so that we can ask as many questions as possible. There is one from the audience for you, Thomas, from Deutsche Telekom. Does everything need to be in the matrix? Why does a refrigerator need to be an Internet of Things device? Are we losing control of our life with the Internet of Things? What do you think?
It's a good question. And a funny story, I had a conversation with one of my teammates on that, and I asked, why the heck are we connecting these kind of devices? Because we're able to do. And this is the most honest answer in most of the cases. But nevertheless, connecting devices can also build really certain use cases for us, making our life easier and more comfortable when it's done in the right way. But just connecting things because you're able to do is surely a stupid way to do the digitization. Yeah. So at the moment, I have no idea for what reason my fridge should be connected, but there might be good reason. And there may be a use case for that in future, which I don't know yet. But what's important is once it is connected, we need to take care that it's connected securely from the first stage. And as Bruce mentioned in his intro, it's becoming more and more important that we have not any longer only authentication from users to systems. We need it from systems to systems, from processes to processes. So it's a much bigger regime of authentication we need in future to build this secure connectivity.
We have another question that I want to...
Let me jump in and explain quickly why your refrigerator is connected, because there's a really good explanation. So 15 years ago, when someone wanted to build a refrigerator, they would make some kind of circuitry and controls. They'd make custom electronics for the refrigerator. Today, you want to build a refrigerator, you pull a Raspberry Pi off the shelf, and you write some software. And that Raspberry Pi comes with an internet stack, comes with a video port, comes with an audio port. So you've got that technology already built in because it's cheaper. And once it's there, it's cheap to use. So that's why all these things are connected, because the way we build them has changed from custom software and custom circuitry to just an off-the-shelf CPU.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for pointing that out and the magic of the Internet of Things. I have one question that I want to direct to you, Alex and Bruce, because it's on the political regulation that we were talking about. It says companies like Facebook or TikTok need to be forced to comply with local rules and to be held accountable for taxes primarily and rules, of course. Otherwise, discussing cybersecurity is senseless. Do you agree?
I have no opinion on tax laws. I mean, countries should pass tax laws that they think are appropriate. And, I think if we have a more consistency in those, then you'll end up with better enforcement. right now, a lot of countries have mechanisms by which you can shift your revenue there. But that's not something I'm an expert in. On security stuff, I don't agree. There's a bunch of companies that are really motivated here, and they are victims of either crimes or geopolitical attacks. And the idea that you can just regulate your way into security is absolutely false.
Bruce?
I'm more optimistic, but it's definitely not the only thing you can do. But I think we do have to change the economic incentives, because right now the economic incentives. SolarWinds is a great example. That is a private equity funded company, and their economic incentives were to make their stuff as lousy as possible without losing customers. Right? That was their economic model, and that's just not a good one for security.
We have another question that is very broad, so probably each one of you want to jump in. It says, what does digital sovereignty mean to you? Is it realistic at all? Maybe if you want to start, Alex.
Good luck.
Digital sovereignty?
Yeah.
So this is one of the key questions is, are citizens in countries allowed to voluntarily opt into the use of products or to be part of communities that are run out of other countries, right? So we keep on having these arguments around who gets to control multinational networks. And last year there's a big brouhaha in the US around TikTok, in which the roles were reversed. Traditionally, you've had non-American jurisdictions, especially in Europe, complaining about American law and the lack of control over American companies. And in this case, the United States was complaining about a product that Americans were choosing to use that was made by a Chinese company, and whether or not, who gets to make the decisions about how that's managed. I think, so one, this is super complicated. We don't have enough time to talk about it. Like, there are countries that have really good arguments here, and there are countries that their arguments are around keeping the people in power, right? So that's what's going on in India right now. So, and so there's a lot of people that throw out some kind of basic ideas here that don't think through the actual texture of what it is like to give sovereignty to all of the different countries in the world, especially in situations where the really horrible things are being promulgated. The Myanmar having is it a violation of digital sovereignty for the Myanmar government to have their mechanism shut down for justifying the genocide that they're conducting against their own minorities, right? Like, it gets really, really complicated very fast. What I would like to see is I'd like to see democracies work together on this. There's the things that, between the US and Europe, the vast majority of goals are the same of what they want out of digital platforms. And I would love to see kind of an alliance of democracies here regulate in a way that is compatible, and that explicitly sets rules around human rights that then are, flow down and are a benefit to citizens of either developing democracies like India or non-democracies like Myanmar. But that kind of cooperation does not seem likely on the horizon.
But you think that is feasible, Bruce, an alliance of democracies on that issue?
So I don't know. So I think I'm going to be very broad here with this broad question. I think we're seeing a mismatch in the size of government units. And historically, that's always been having to do with the speed of communication and transportation. City-states and local moving into, in the mid-1700s or later in the 1800s, things that are kind of the U.S. state size, European country size. And now we have the United States, the EU. They're all representing the kind of size of thing that with communication transportation you can effectively deal with. And now we are getting more into global problems. And whether it's the internet or climate change or bio, these are all global problems. And now the large country-sized governments aren't really suitable for the task. This is a way bigger problem that we're going to solve in this panel, but I think that's what we're seeing here. And that's why a lot of things aren't working. Because the EU size, the US size, even the India size, the China size is not a really good size of government to deal with these issues. We need bigger, and we don't really have those mechanisms.
Well, as always, we are strictly regulated here time-wise on that panel, so we have exactly 1 minute left for your take, Thomas.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, when we talk about digital sovereignty, it's a question how we would define that. To really achieve full sovereignty, it's quite impossible, I guess. But what do we need instead? At least we need the ability to judge and to measure technology, which we not have our hands on, and where we don't in control of the supply chain. This is becoming more important than ever before, in my view. So certification, inspection, and these kind of things, we need to work on these kind of skill sets to have that at least here when we're depending on foreign markets.
Oh, thanks so much, Thomas. I hope the talking heads started making sense. And I really hope we can reconnect next year in person. Alex can bring his family, as he already announced. And thanks so much, Alex, Bruce, Thomas. Thanks so much for putting this panel together, Peter. And we will see you soon, hopefully.
Next year in Antarctica.
Yeah, pleasure.
Exactly, the seventh continent, yeah.
Gregory, I can assure you it made a lot of sense. And thank you very much to our experts, talking heads, Bruce Schneier, Alex Stamos, and Thomas 𝗀𝗄𝗃. So we'll enjoy a short break here at Munich Bayerischer Hof, and you can listen to the music of the Florian Blau Trio. Go ahead, please. Let's move on to our fifth panel today. Corporate cyber risk management. What makes the difference? Moderator is 𝗀𝗃𝗄𝗃. He's global coordinator of the Charter of Trust Siemens, representing the company's cybersecurity to external organizations like the World Economic Forum and particularly the Charter of Trust. He's also responsible for implementing the Charter of Trust principles within Siemens, and he's a member of the Siemens Security Cybersecurity Board. 𝗂𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗏, we are very curious to gain insight into the corporate perspective. Go ahead with the fifth panel, please.
Well, thank you very much. Now, we heard throughout the day that data breaches, ransomware attacks, privacy failures and other cybersecurity issues are now on everybody's radar. But still, we see that companies seem to struggle with preparing for them. They lack insight in the cyber risk. They might not have the right strategies in place. They don't practice their recovery plans, if they have recovery plans at all. So one could say that most organizations' approach to risk management is actually pretty risky. Now, the challenges that hold companies back are manifold, and I'm very happy that in today's panel we can discuss this matter. The panel is labeled Corporate Cyber Risk Management, What Makes the Difference? So without further ado, I want to introduce the panel, and I would go from east to west, if that's okay. And we start all the way in Japan, where Mihoko Matsubara is in Tokyo, very late at night, so thank you for staying up so long for us. She's the Chief Cyber Security Strategist at NTT Corporation, NTT Global. She previously worked for the Japanese Ministry of Defense and has a master of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. She's very active on social media. She's a writer, she's a speaker, and well, I think we can say so she's also an influencer. So I follow you on Twitter, and if you also want to do so, please feel free to do so. Then let's move a little bit westwards to Germany, also to Munich, where I'm sitting. We have Ramon Mörl, who founded the company IT Watch in 2002, and ever since is, of course, the founder and also the chief executive officer. He graduated in computer science from Munich Technical University, and he's very active in all kinds of forums and associations. And well, Ramon, I think you're all over the place, so this is always interesting. So nice to have you. Now, and let's go still a little bit westwards, and I think we go to Great Britain, though Martin Clemens is working for Credit Suisse, located in Zurich. But he's based out of Great Britain, if I'm not mistaken. He's the security advisor for Credit Suisse, and in this function, he advises both the CEO, but also the advisory board on matters of cybersecurity and innovation by and large. He has a long history in cybersecurity, 33 years in national security in Great Britain, brings tremendous experience on this matter, and well, I mean, I think he can tell from his experience, but of course also from the current work that he's doing on risk management. And then let's jump the pond and move all the way to the US, where Melody Balsett is located. Melody told me that it's pretty windy over there today, so hopefully the line is stable. Melody is the US head of cyber technology, data and resilience risk for Barclays. I hope I got that one wrong, that one right, Melody. And she had been working for other companies like AES and IBM. She holds a master with merit from the University of Manchester, and she's very active also, or she has been very active in forums like ISACA, for example, in the past. So welcome to all the panelists. I'm very happy to have all of you, and let's dive right into this, if I may. First question, let's stay with Melody in the US. So tell us a little bit about the importance of risk management to cybersecurity, Melody.
Sure, thanks, Kai. I'd be glad to take that question. And it's such a simple question, right, on the surface, but it's also one that has incredible depth at the same time. There's so many different ways you can describe and explain that. But if I were to respond plainly, right, without risk management, cybersecurity is just noise, right? It's a map without a compass, if you will. To truly understand your cybersecurity posture and run an effective cybersecurity program, you really need to have defined and measurable risk management. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of break down 3 different areas that I think need particular focus within cybersecurity. And so the first is with identifying risks. It's at the simplest, most foundational point of risk management, but understanding the breadth of your risk cannot be done in a silo, right? Because risk identification can come from many different sources, right, beyond just your tools. It could be from end users even. And if you actually apply the 3 lines of defense model, it could come from any organization within any 3 of those layers. And so it's otherwise relatively easy to identify your vulnerabilities, your compliance gaps, configuration compliance gaps, and the attacks against your infrastructure. So don't work in a silo. And second is really prioritization. And where I see a lot of cybersecurity organizations fail is effective prioritization and the ability to assess business impact against likelihood. And so that's also, I'd say, at the foundation of effective risk management to cybersecurity. If you can, I mean, in other words, if you can't prioritize and create that view, you're not going to be able to apply the right risk treatment, whether that's risk acceptance, whether it's transfer of risk or mitigation of risk. So you can apply, and even better, if you can apply this to your organization's risk appetite with the appropriate tolerance levels, you're now going to be armed to have a conversation with leadership that makes sense to the business. And I just want to land on the third thing, which is really about enhancing your intelligence capabilities. And if you're fighting today's threats, then you've already lost the battle. So making sure that you're informed by the threats that are on the horizon and that are also specific to your organization is absolutely critical. So the key point really is solve for tomorrow, and this will help you greatly enhance your ability to manage risk.
Thank you, Melody. Well, yeah, that's a nice thought, like solve for tomorrow. And we also learned that risk management is very fundamental to cybersecurity. Now, with that in mind, Mihoko, if I may turn to you, how institutionalized is that topic, for example, in your environment, in NTT Corporation, also in your area, in the critical infrastructure area?
Sure. Thank you so much. So let me talk about how institutionalized the cyber risk management is at NTT Group, which I'm working for. So the NTT Group has 280,000 employees in we operate in over 190 countries around the world. So we cover not only telecommunications, IT, cybersecurity services, but we also cover finance, urban development, advertisement, you name it. So it is really important to us to have a common global language to talk to each other because we have such a broader cultural differentiations among us. So that's why we decided to choose the NIST cybersecurity framework for the cyber risk management. And the NTT Group has cybersecurity strategy and a minimum baseline based upon the NIST cybersecurity framework. And we also have a global CISO, Shinichi Yokohama, and he hosts CISO committees from different operation companies, CISOs, twice a year, and we discuss the trend of cyber threats, and we also update the cybersecurity efforts made by each operation companies every 6 months. And our global CISO also participate in the weekly executive meetings to update our C-suites, and he also regularly briefs to our auditors so that the C-suites and the board members and auditors are all up to speed of the threat landscapes and also the cyber risk management. But to do that, as Melody mentioned during her excellent presentation, measurement is important. And to do measurement, we also have to have a good visualization. to understand how to manage risks. So we use several measures to do, several ways to do that. And one way to do is the questionnaire based upon the NIST cybersecurity framework. And we also use a heat map to see the changes of the cyber risk to manage. And we also use dashboards to see the trend of, for example, phishing emails we see every week, so that our C-suite can see the changes or the trend of cyber threats and how to prioritize the cyber risk management. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihoko. That was very interesting to see how it's done in entity group. One thing you talked about, and also Melody talked about, was also giving transparency to leadership, to the executive level. And I think we have a panelist who can talk about this, because Martin, this is your job, right? You're an advisor to the CEO. So maybe I don't want to talk to you about how you advise the leadership, but also the other way around. What are also the duties or responsibilities of leadership, the CEO, the chair? What do they have to do if it comes to cyber risk management from your perspective?
Well, look, Kai, thanks very much indeed. I mean, I think in some ways it's the flip side of things that Miho and Melody have already mentioned. And not everyone has got the memo, by the way. I'll just pick up on something that Bruce said earlier on in the previous session, that not everyone's listening out there, including some leaders. And my goodness, at least in my opinion, it screams out at you if an enterprise has or hasn't got an engaged top leadership when it comes to cyber. I mean, look, there's a lot they got to do, but let me just make a few key points. Perhaps we can come back to them later. I mean, the first thing they do is that they inform themselves about cyber threats. And they use that knowledge to lead a discussion about cyber risk appetite, as I think it was Melody's already mentioned. I mean, that discussion's really got to happen. I mean, no defense against cyber is perfect. So the question the leader of all people has got to answer is how good is good enough? You know, if they're going to answer that, they've got to get educated about the threat at all levels. And I often talk about the strategic, the operational, and the tactical level. So the strategic level, the geopolitics behind it. The operational level, the systemic way in which the risk is changing. You know, why is there so much ransomware out there at the moment? And what do you need to think through to be ready for that? Well, what you need to think through is your ransom policy, so you don't have to do it in a hurry in a crisis. Look, a second headline I'll mention is about leadership itself, the leadership of the organization, their own personal leadership, which need to evolve to be fit for the digital age, a phrase I rather like. I really love cyber incident exercises led by the CEO because, of course, he's always throw out valuable lessons, but also because they send a message. This matters to me, so it matters to you too. Look, there's a lot more here about putting the right non-executive oversight of cyber in place. So I'm glad somebody mentioned dashboards. Miho mentioned dashboards already, hugely important, deceptively so. And all of this, though, is not enough. It's a truism that cyber risk management has got to be holistic. People talk about process, technology, and people, but I'd add things like behavior, culture, and values. And only the very top leaders can persistently pull all of these threads together, and they must be pulled together. I would add that the cyber-ready CEO and chair, they seek additional assurance personally. For example, you mentioned my role by appointing their own experts to provide a second opinion about cyber defenses, or by sponsoring carefully targeted red team testing or similar. Look, just one final headline, and it's about what I call digital advantage. That the top of the shop is where the benefits of digitization can best be judged against the price to be paid for them, i.e. including cybersecurity. I mean, typically, it's perhaps surprising, we don't often make this comparison. And perhaps it's best to think of cyber as a tax, and a tax at a very reasonable low level on the overwhelming massive benefits of digitization. The best 21st century leaders very much have that trade-off in mind. Now, look, I'm going to take a risk with my weak German here Ladies and gentlemen, I think in Munich that we ought to say that cyber really is Chefsache.
Yeah, I love it. It was perfect, perfectly pronounced. And yes, Chefsache is something that we in Germany like very much. So that's good. As long as cybersecurity is not Neuland for the CEOs, right? So that's this notion of they don't know what this is all about. But I think you made that point that the best CEOs in this day and age, they are cyber savvy. They understand that they need to think about cyber and not just digital transformation, but also the text. So you have this picture of a text. So I like that very much. And I also heard from you, it needs to be holistic, right? This holistic, this broad view, including more than technology, organization, and so forth. Now, when I think of holistic, I'm also thinking in this day and age beyond the company boundaries, right? Towards the ecosystem, towards the supply chain. And in our previous panel with Bruce and Thomas, they've been speaking about the supply chain. And I know that, Roman, you have this kind of thinking anyway. So, Roman, I want to ask you, so how's the ecosystem notion and the supply chain relevant to risk management?
Very good question. Thank you for that. So, in my opinion, as Melody already pointed out, is risk management is the top discipline. And secondary to that, we have things like digital sovereignty, because yes, I want to have the things I bought making work the way I like, and not any other people can interfere with my will in the cyberspace. The second is cybersecurity. We are reducing the risk of running out of business by raising our security invests. So now, like 3 years ago, Ms. von der Leyen, now our head of European Union, was at that point our Minister for Defense. She said that in her opinion, all the vehicles that we have for defense in sea, in air, and on land are nothing else like $1 million IoT devices. And they have a very, very long supply chain. And there is an entire ecosystem working on putting those billion-dollar devices together. So how can you make sure that if cyber is key for those billion-dollar devices to work properly, that cyber is working properly in those $1 million IoT devices? And this question we raised in one of our very strong alliances, discussed for the last 3 years, and we came to the point, the first management doctrine is you cannot manage what you can't measure. Then we figured out, well, if you want to measure something, you have to know it. So it is impossible to reduce risks if you don't know what is inside the box. So now that leads to take a car or a train, and you want to understand exactly which hardware and software components in the IT are built in. That means you want to understand each controller on each of those devices built in. And you want to understand each of the patch mechanisms used to enhance the capabilities of those CPUs inside it. So what does that mean? The entire supply chain must deliver all the pieces that are in and must explain how to patch. Now let's change to the B2C market. Assume you have a vacuum cleaning robot. What is there? It always has power. So now you have a student building in a camera, a microphone, and a wireless interface. Well, that's very easy. Now you deliver it because you say, well, the accu of the old thing may explode, use this one. And it will be used. So what you have is an Alexa that is steered by you. And now what do we call that? Well, it's added values. In the speech of the backdoors, you are just adding values to a product. And if you add the product values, like in the car, you have a camera and you have the voice control, you may be able to have any cab in the world to be monitored. So the businessman sitting inside, we've heard about some of the nations putting like microphones into the business class seats of their air. Yeah, we have heard that. But what does that mean if you want to opposite against it? Well, you have to take control. And taking control means you know exactly what is built in. So that's the story. What is the challenge for the ecosystems and for the supply chain? We have to know exactly what is in and how to patch that. This is not an easy story, but we have to challenge it.
Thank you, Ramon. Yeah, I was just about to say, it seems like it's not an easy story. Can I stay with you, Ramon, for just another question, if that's okay? Because that really intrigued me to ask, okay, now we know the challenge. It seems to be terribly complex. I think this picture of billion-dollar IoT devices is a little bit frightening, I have to admit, though I'm in cybersecurity, so I see a lot of bad stories. But this one, you know, that's even worse than the IoT fridge, right? That is normally discussed. So it is about visibility, it's about asset management, it's about being on top of patch management. I get that. It is terribly complex. What's the state of play today? So we know the challenge, but I want to ask you, Ramon, where are we today, right? Are we there yet?
We have many in the think tank thinking in the right way, and some even acting in the right way. So like 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿 has told us, trust is the currency for diplomacy. The first thing what we have to do is we have to be very clear in our wording and in the granularity. So what do you expect to be trustworthiness when you buy a Bluetooth chip? There are no added values inside. So the Bluetooth chip doesn't have any backdoors and can talk to anybody which you don't know. This is a feature you expect from a trustworthy Bluetooth chip. So how do you get the trust in the delivery chain? How can you be sure? Well, you can say, well, if I have a liability of, let's say, $500 million for a piece that costs me $1, that's sufficient for me. And probably you will check whether the $500 million liability will be in effect. Because if that's the startup and there are two guys hanging around and just have like $10,000 on the bank account, it will not be helpful to have this liability. So what I'm trying to say is you have a fine granularity on the trust that you put in things. And yes, you can document that. And yes, if you have this entire supply chain, you can also build a trust chain. So you can have the attributes that you're interested in modulated in a trust chain. So what does that help? Assume you are very, very interested in availability. you will figure out that any invest in availability is opposite to invest in confidentiality. This is something that not everybody has from the first take. So take two firewalls, you have two ISPs, you get the firewall from the one vendor on the one side and from the other on the other side. What have you done? You have increased availability. Because if one of the firewalls gets down, the other works still. So now what I'm trying to tell is that not for each device, confidentiality is the most important thing. So now the chain of trust goes along with availability, for example, and you can kick out all the rest.
So you really have to deep dive a little bit into, and it's kind of device specific, and also the parts in the supply chain need to be managed, let's say individually and looked at individually, if I understand correctly, right?
That's all about management, yes.
Yes, thanks, Roman. That was very interesting to see, and also this notion of trust. All of a sudden, I need to say, coming into risk management. Now, I'm a firm believer that trust is very important, and of course, I'm with the ambassador there that trust is very important. Trust is a currency. I say trust is gold, and this is also something that is in the ecosystem, and you need to think about the ecosystem. Now, thinking about this relationship of a company, let's say, to the surrounding companies, to the economy that they're active in, that also brings me to the notion of benchmarking and checking how a company performs in relation to other companies, or what is also out there in terms of threats and challenges. Mihoko, if I can turn to you again, how is the notion of benchmarking and external knowledge, threat intelligence important to risk management? How do you do that at NTT Group?
Sure. So I must mention the Charter of Trust, because Charter of Trust, as the name mentions and symbolizes, it's all about trust, right? Because it started out as a European companies focused consortiums to talk about cyber threats and educations and supply chain risk management, and as Ramon mentioned. But it's now more globalized, and NTT is the second member from the Indo-Pacific. And as we globalize, we have better picture and visualize the cyber risks and also supply chain risk management. So that's great. But we also have to have a sector-specific landscape on cyber threats and supply chain risk management. So that's why each country or each region has an ISACs, or information sharing and analysis centers. And luckily enough, Japan has multiple ISACs, like telecommunications, ICT, finance, and so does the United States. And we also have a cross-sector forum in Japan consisting of different critical infrastructure sectors, so that we can talk about not only cyber threats, but we can also talk about education and cultivation of cyber professionals. Because as Ramon said, cyber risk management is all about technology, process, and people. So I think that these different layers of platforms to talk about different issues by sector, by country, and by region, or by the globe, and then I think we are in a good shape to understand the cyber risk management.
Thank you, and thanks for, well, of course, referencing the Charter of Trust, which is close to my heart. So thanks for that. And also for giving us an overview on how this is done in Japan, which is, of course, very interesting to the audience. Now, there's two routes that I want to pursue in what you just said. One was working with external bodies, authorities, and the other one is more about the people dimension, the human dimension, the education. I want to park that for a second. first want to go to the authorities, and I think, Martin, I want to give that question to you. How do you best kind of incorporate or work together on cyber issues with authorities, national authorities, law enforcement, and or also peers? Please give us an insight, maybe from your vast experience.
Well, look, I mean, I'll tell you how not to do it, and how not to do it is suddenly and in the middle of an instant. So I guess the key message is get in touch while there's nothing going on. Learn who out there can help you. And if you're running a global enterprise, you may be in lots of different jurisdictions. So figure out who's really smart and good on different subject areas. I mean, look, you might want to work out how to build relationships with people, frankly, invite people in, get them to give you talks within the limits of what is allowable to you. Of course, do your best to be helpful in return. So I would say all of that is of vital importance. And can I just add one other advert in this space? Don't do it alone. Do it in good company. Build alliances with your peers. Think about the people who you're normally in commercial competition with. Go phone them up. As a top leader, one of the my advice is give license to the CISOs to talk to each other intimately, and especially in the middle of incidents. So those would just be my sort of brief thoughts on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So this notion of collaboration and also setting this up before the crisis hits, right? So establish these relationships in, let's say, good times, so that they are also there and helpful in hopefully times that never come.
And when you're doing your top level cyber incident exercise, you better think about, okay, so who would we have phoned at that point? Are they still in the job? When did we last see them? Have things moved on in this jurisdiction since the last time we wrote this down? You take the point.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I already said I wanted to think a little bit about the education and the human factor. And as it happens, there's a question from the audience, which I would like to give to Melody, if I may, because I know, Melody, you have been active on 𝗖𝗂𝗏 and the like. So these institutions that are very helpful in educating on cybersecurity. The question goes like this: a major source of cyber risk is the human factor. How can the human factor better be integrated in risk strategies? Melody.
Sure, Kai. Thank you. It's an interesting question that comes up a lot, right? Because at the end of the day, your company or organization is only as strong as your people and end users. It's the expertise of your cybersecurity team. It's not the wizards in the IT department, but it's the people that use the technology and that must follow and adhere the policies that you set out. And so there are different things you have to consider. I mean, one, I think most of us understand that the more you can automate, the better, right? Take the risk out of the hands of the user. It's always going to be a goal you want to strive for, right? And do that as much as you can, because when you can automate, when you can collect and monitor, you are able to get insights that will help you better protect the organization and understand what some of those risks are, right? But at the end of the day, there are certain risks that you're not going to be able to automate or to be able to control through technical means. And for that reason, it's extremely critical that you have an effective, not just a training and education program, but a communication strategy. Right. This is open dialogue with the end users, with your community, with stakeholders across the organization. And this message needs to come from different leaders across the company as well. You mentioned 𝗖𝗂𝗏, for example, right? It's an organization that I've been very close to for many, many years. It's an industry organization that helps advise people that work within IT and cybersecurity, risk management, and audit. And it's really been a good place for communities to come together to help solve some of those problems, have some of those conversations that Martin was saying with your peers, right? When you go to conferences like this, one of the biggest values from that is it's one, of course, the content that the conferences deliver, but more so it's those meetings and conversations you have with the person sitting next to you, right? How are the other people that are around you solving probably the same problems that you're faced within your organization? Have those conversations and get ideas, right? And back to back to 𝗧𝗂𝗰𝗂𝗏, they have a plethora of materials and resources that you can use and reuse and share. It's just a great community of people to get connected with if you want to understand some of these challenges better.
Thank you. Mihoko, I saw you wanted to also say something to this, so please go ahead.
Sure. So the some factor we haven't talked about today is I think the stress level, because the reason why we are using this platform, combining face-to-face meetings in a nice hotel in Munich with live music, and also the webinar and the online to talk to each other, is because of this, thanks to this pandemic, right? But we human beings and we have been able to utilize IT technologies to talk to each other and stay connected. But it also creates a huge amount of workload, especially for IT and cybersecurity workforce. And Microsoft published a really interesting report last month on the stress level among cybersecurity professionals. And Microsoft noticed that we see the more work to do and more online meetings to take care of. So they feel so fatigued and stressed. And we really, as Melody, emphasize the importance of the face-to-face meetings and contact and physical contact to each other. So I think it's worthwhile to mention during this Munich Cyber Security Conference how to take down the level of stress among cybersecurity professionals, because they are the unsung heroes to protect ourselves from cyber threats. And this is especially important for cyber risk management and for this webinar on cyber risk management.
Thank you, Mihoko. Yeah, a very important point, right? With the cyber threats rising and of course the workload to cybersecurity professionals rising, and actually no end in sight, right? So the pandemic leading to more and more remote work and all our world going online, of course, it's more and more important to do cybersecurity right. So taking good care of our people, of our cybersecurity people, is important. Thank you for mentioning that, Mihoko, and really an important matter. One thing that could relieve the situation a little bit, or at least there are high hopes, and Melody mentioned it earlier, was automation. There is a question from the audience that is more specific also on AI and deep learning. And the question is on AI and deep learning in the sense of, can they contribute to a better risk management and relieve risk and security professionals? And I will just throw this question into the room, whoever wants to take it, but maybe Martin or Ramon, do you feel like answering that question? Let's go with Martin first, if I may.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kai. I tell you what this does remind me of is a question that used to get asked often when I was in government, which was, it's one of the sort of fun party questions for cyber professionals, if you like, is the offense or is the defense going to end up on top? And the answer, of course, is neither. It's going to go on forever. This is going to be an arms race. And for every new technology that comes along to help us, like machine learning, along comes some other new feature which is going to cause us difficulty, in this case, perhaps adversarial machine learning, or the ability of deep neural networks to develop new tools to trouble our defenses. So the answer to the specific question is that, yes, of course, machine learning can help us in many ways, but then it's going to need to, because the threat is going to continue to accelerate. Now, my guess is that Ramon has got more to add to that, so I'll stop there.
Ramon, please go ahead.
Well, if I'm allowed to, there are two questions that I was shortly reading. One is about how can EU get digital sovereignty? And the other is how can governments and companies work together to secure stability and reliability? If you wouldn't mind, I would love to take that question.
Go ahead. Pick one of them if that's okay, and then we leave the other one to somebody else on the panel. So I know digital sovereignty is close to your heart. So Ramon, if you want to take that one, that would be great.
Yeah. So we have to see that the method how cybersecurity is purchased is not best of the breed, but cheapest cost. So what we do is we reduce quality to reduce the price. That doesn't help communities, ecosystems to be built up to be full scale. So we see that like every computer has an antivirus on it. What we see is antivirus is a cheap and pressing market. So the vendors for antivirus will not cooperate. That's the result. If we press the price down, we don't have any expertise anymore. We have like 3-5 global players. So now when we look, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 has asked for cooperation. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 has asked for tools to protect. And Helge Schmidt said, we need confidence and trust. And in my opinion, this does work together only if we accept that having a high knowledge needs to be fed by money. It doesn't help. Because those who have real high knowledge, they will be driven out of the market by those who sell fake security. And we have a lot of fake security. So we have to really challenge that problem on a political, on an alliance, on a consumer, and on a manufacturer side. And we can't get them together at the moment because €1 is spent only one time. It may be spent for a new SAP version. It may also be spent for any computer science investigation. But still, the fight for this €1 is dominant, is key against producing collective quality, cooperation that gives us full-scale security from all of the vendors, all of the manufacturers. So I hope this statement is saying what I'm really trying to do for the last 30 years, bringing together communities with knowledge. And I see money is always opposite.
Thank you, Ramon, for this observation of collaboration, of bringing together knowledge. Now, maybe since we only have 3 minutes left, I want to do a very last round also of the other 3 panelists, taking this notion of collaboration, because we all said it's important. Now, I want to ask you, how can we increase that level of collaboration? And please give me just 1 or 2 sentences. And I want to start with Mihoko. 1-2 sentences. How do we increase collaboration on cybersecurity?
To accelerate collaboration, I think we need trusted leaders so that everybody wants to, okay, because he or she says this, we have to do this, because then he or she knows now what to prioritize. Then we can accelerate the collaboration, I think.
Excellent, thank you. Melody, right over to you. 1-2 sentences. How do we better collaborate?
Yes, and I think Martin touched on it earlier, but it's breaking down the barriers to collaboration, much like the organizations like the Charter of Trust. It's enabling legally the ability to have conversations with your competitors, right, that your business competitors, and talk about these discussions as a cybersecurity cohort. So breaking down the barriers to collaboration.
Excellent. So we heard kind of top-down leadership, breaking down the barriers. Martin, anything to add to this on collaboration? Anything else you can give to the audience?
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll quickly quote 2 US presidents.
Wow.
First of all, Barack Obama, which is don't let a good crisis go to waste. So every time we have a major incident, I wish I had $1 for every time I bet SolarWinds has been mentioned today. But don't let a good crisis go to waste. Use these incidents before something truly terrible happens. And then finally, Bill Clinton, you know, and I love the question earlier on about people. You know, hey, look, you know, in the sense of cooperation, in the sense of the malicious insider or just the incompetent insider, you know, I heard a great phrase once, which was, you know, cyber, well, it's the people, stupid.
Thank you very much. And how nice to end with quoting two US presidents. So thanks a lot for this panel. I want to do a really quick summary or wrap up of what we talked about before we then, of course, give back to the moderator and continue with the conference. So really short, we learned that risk management is really fundamental to cybersecurity because it is about really prioritizing and measuring the risks and then prioritizing the strategies and the measures that you take to deal with that risk. Now, that exercise is, of course, done by the cybersecurity team and the CISO and the needs to involve the top level leadership, and they also have a duty to take care of it. So it's Chefsache, as we heard from Martin. Now, what they have to do is to really have that holistic view, incorporating the supply chain, looking also to the outside world, and also doing this benchmarking outside. And one thing that they need to do is take good care of their people, educate people, and really take in the human factor. And by doing so, well, they can have a good risk management and setup, but there's also a lot to be done. So collaborate more. That's at least one statement that we want to give back to the conference. It's all about collaboration. Thank you very much to the panelists, and also thank you to the audience for listening in. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our moderator and to the panel. Thank you, Kai Hermansen, and special thanks to our experts, Martin Clemens, 𝗧𝗂𝗰𝗂𝗿𝗁𝗂 Melody Belset, and last but not least, Ramon Mörl. For the next topic, I will hand over to John Mangers, founder of C-Suite Advisors. John Mangers, please.
Thank you very much. We're truly honored and excited about the next session. Allow me to take this opportunity to briefly introduce our two speakers. Lisa Monaco was sworn in as the 39th Deputy Attorney General of the United States on 21st of April and will return to the United States Department of Justice, where she arrived as an intern 26 years ago. Ms. Monaco has an impressive record of government service spanning more than 2 decades. Among other positions at the Department of Justice, she has served as an Assistant United States Attorney, Chief of Staff at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, and Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division. She also served as the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. Ms. Monaco has practiced law, specializing in data security and privacy, and co-chairing her law firm's practice group in these areas. She has counseled businesses and understands the regulatory liability and other challenges facing them. Ms. Monaco will be interviewed by Gordon Correra, who's been a security correspondent for BBC News since June 2004. In that role, he covers national security issues, including counterterrorism, espionage, and cybersecurity for BBC TV, radio, and online. He was previously a foreign affairs reporter on the Today program. Gordon has been a State Department correspondent based in Washington, D.C., the U.S. affairs analyst for BBC News, and is the author of a number of books. So let's hear a legal perspective of enforcing cybersecurity.
Lisa Monaco, thank you very much for joining us at the Munich Cyber Security Forum. You're a familiar face to those of us who've covered national security from your time as a Homeland Security and Counterterrorism advisor during the Obama administration. You've returned to the Department of Justice, and I'm imagining that cybersecurity is now at the top of your list and when it comes to your in-trade. Could you give us a sense really of what your priorities are in what I think is your first week in office?
Well, thanks so much, Gordon, and it's great to be with you, and it's great to be part of this conference, to be part of this forum. It is especially timely and especially important when we look at the array of threats facing us in the cyber realm. You're quite right. I am in my first week on the job. I think we're at day 5, Gordon, and I'm just thrilled to be back at the Justice Department. It was my home for 15 years, where I learned to be a lawyer, where I learned to be a public servant. And so I'm thrilled to be back at the department and serving here again. When it comes to priorities, the Attorney General and I have been quite clear. First and foremost, we will lead the department consistent with its foundational values, going to advance civil rights and equal justice under law, and very importantly, protecting from emerging threats and threats we face in the here and now. And that, of course, means extremism in all its forms, from foreign and domestic, and critically, and top of my priority list, the cyber threat. And this is one where, Gordon, I have seen evolve over my time in government and since leaving government and coming back. It has exploded. It has become more diffuse, more sophisticated, more dangerous than ever before. I think we're at a pivot point yet again when it comes to the cyber threat. I've seen this evolve over time. Indeed, when I was the Homeland Security Advisor, I met with the president every morning on the most urgent threats facing the nation. And what I found in that is that over time, I spent more and more time in that briefing every morning talking to him about cyber threats, whether it's from nation states or criminal enterprises. And you don't need, though, a presidential briefing every morning to understand that the cyber threat has exploded. And today, as I return to the Justice Department, what I'm seeing is that we are at this pivot point. And I think what distinguishes today's threat and what I'm seeing and what I'm acutely focused on and what we will be focusing on here in the department is how malicious actors are exploiting the technology that has been such a boon to our commerce, to free speech, to the way we communicate, to the way we drive, you name it. We have over time moved all of that, everything we do from the analog to the digital space, but we didn't do it with security in mind, as this group convening today knows all too well. Well, we're at another point where new technologies and connectivity is exploding in a way that I think we really have to think about how the bad actors are exploiting it. And what we're seeing now is that technology, that innovation, the way we are using new innovation and technology, it's being used against us. And it's being used against us by nation state adversaries, by criminal enterprises. And we see it in the supply chain attack in SolarWinds. We see it in the use of ransomware. And we launched a ransomware task force just last week to really go after that particular manifestation of the cyber threat. But we need to rethink, as your title of the conference rightly points out, and really assess, are we using the most effective strategies against this kind of new evolution, this pivot point that I think we're at today in the cyber threat. And that's why, Gordon, we are launching this week, under my direction, a review of how the department is looking at exactly this set of challenges. We want to bring forth actionable recommendations in a 120-day timeframe, so there is no time to lose, on what can we be doing better working with our partners across borders to address these threats. Things like, how is digital currency becoming a tool and something that is also exploited? What are we doing about the supply chain attacks that we're seeing? How can we address the blended threat of nation states and criminal enterprises sometimes working together to exploit our own infrastructure against us? So there is a great deal to do, and we're launching this review to make sure we are bringing all the tools we can to address it.
Let's pick up on a few of those issues in the time we've got. You mentioned ransomware there in the review. that is clearly a growing problem. I mean, there were reports, I think the Washington, D.C. Police Department got ransomware attacked in the last week. We heard reports in Germany last year, I think, of potentially a patient dying because a hospital they were due to go to was hit by a ransomware attack. Lots of issues surrounding that, which are having a real impact on people's lives. What do you think can be done about this problem, which feels like it's almost exploding in volume?
Well, it is. And I think last year was the worst year we have experienced to date when it comes to ransomware. Billions of dollars of impact on victims, from Fortune 500 companies to small businesses to governments alike at all levels, as you rightly point out. And it is not just about money. It's about mayhem, right? As you point out, when the victim is a hospital, we're talking life and death. And when a victim is a critical infrastructure holder, we are talking the main avenues of how we power our grid, how we get our water supply, you name it. So this is something that we are acutely focused on. We've launched this ransomware and digital extortion task force, because here again, what we're seeing in some of these cases is the use of ransomware, not just to extort money, but to hold hostage critical pieces of information, whether it's hospital records, whether it's proprietary technology. So I think what we need to do, and what our task force will be focused on, is how do we go after the entire ecosystem that is being used, the infrastructure that bad actors are using, the digital currency they're using as a means to perpetrate their extortion efforts, you name it. We have to take a holistic look at it.
So that means going after that infrastructure, the support infrastructure, if you like, a slightly more, less just playing defense, but trying to go on the offense a bit more about those who are behind these acts. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And that's why we're launching this review this week, because ransomware is one manifestation, which we are now seeing in the headlines. But more broadly, what else? What is the next ransomware that we're going to have to deal with? What is the next exploitation by bad actors of other technologies, whether it's AI, again, digital currency issues? What is the next iteration of the supply chain attack that we've seen? So, of course, the Justice Department has tools that it can use, and we are working every day with our partners to disrupt, to deter, and to hold accountable malicious cyber actors using these and exploiting these technologies. But we have got to move at the same speed that our adversaries are.
It was interesting, I think, in the last week or so, the Department of Justice authorized the FBI to go after some of the malicious software which had been installed on computers, quite a kind of forward-leaning move. Is that the kind of thing we can expect to see more of?
Absolutely. We need to be working, again, with our partners overseas. We have done some of the best work working with our partners in Europe, working with the private sector to go after that infrastructure. You, of course, know, and the folks attending this conference know, the 𝗫𝗏𝗫𝗏 bot takedown was a great example of partnership going after the exploitation of infrastructure by malicious actors. Sharing more information with the private sector, working closely with the private sector, who, of course, the victims on the front lines of these attacks. So we have got to get innovative and aggressive, and we have to work collaboratively and cooperatively with our partners and with the private sector if we are going to keep pace with what the malicious actors are doing.
We talked about the rise in ransomware. There also seems to have been a more aggressive posture from some nation states. Clearly Russia with the SolarWinds attack, also the Microsoft Exchange incident, which was linked to actors in China. In the past, the Department of Justice has been quite forward-leaning in indicting individuals sometimes, and has done that going back, I think, to Chinese actors back during the Obama administration. Do you feel that is working as a tactic? Does it serve to deter them? What else can be done to deter, or is it just a question of disrupting some of these activities by nation states?
We've got to do both, Gordon. And I am a proponent of taking that approach. You point out the work the Justice Department did against Chinese cyber actors. That's work that I began when I was the head of the National Security Division the last time I was in the department. And we honed our focus. We saw nation states exploiting the cyber realm to do what I call geopolitical one-upsmanship. They are going after our intellectual property. They're going after research and development, and yes, going after state secrets and doing traditional espionage. But we've got to focus on the use that nation states, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, are making of these tools. And certainly the criminal justice process, identifying, calling out, and holding to account those actors is one tool. The use of sanctions, as you have seen, working with partners is another tool. Exposing, I think very important to expose this activity, to marginalize it to the extent we can, and then work with partners to deter and disrupt it.
Lisa Monaco, I'm afraid we're out of time, but it's been great to hear from you in your first week about those priorities, about the review, about the focus on ransomware and going after the infrastructure. Thank you very much for joining us here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Lisa Monaco, for your statement. And thank you also very much, 𝗀𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗏, for this interview. So let's move on already to our last guest at MCSC 2021. Let me introduce Roland Weigert, Vice Minister of the Government of Bavaria at the Ministry of Economy, which is the patronizer of this event. What are your closing remarks of the conference? What is your conclusion?
On behalf of the organizer, I'd like to greet the chairman of the Security Network Munich, Mr. Wintergerst, the vice president of the European Commission, Mrs. Vestager, State Minister Baer, State Secretary 𝗀𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗏, Secretary Albright, distinguished guests of the Munich Cyber Security Conference. It is a joy to see the MCSC back again in 2021. The event is being hosted virtually this year due to Corona. However, a virtual format is also fitting given the nature of this conference. Digitalization is advancing in giant leaps. In these past months, the pandemic in particular has accelerated the development of digital solutions. More people are working from home. Yet, that means there are also more cyber attacks and therefore more challenges for IT security. To defend against them successfully, everyone will need to pull together. Measures need to be rolled out across all levels: technical, technological, legal, and even the business management. For executive management in particular plays a crucial role when it comes to combating cyber risks. The Bavarian state government's high-tech agenda and funding under the Bavarian Collaborative Research Program set the right course for the corresponding technologies. Our policy is to provide targeted support and ensure long-term funding. That is why the Bavarian Ministry of Economic Affairs launched the Security Network Munich 9 years ago. In cooperation with the cybersecurity platform at Bayern Innovativ GmbH, the Security Network Munich now provides central support for the network initiatives as well as for the users of such technologies. It is not least due to this intense networking that Bavaria is a leading location in the field of IT security. Here, global collaboration and knowledge transfer are actively fostered between researchers, private industry, and users. This interaction among professionals enriches their work and benefits all of us in a lasting manner in terms of cybersecurity. That's why I believe MCSC 2021 has once again been an extremely valuable event for all participants. Many thanks to the Security Network Munich for the outstanding organizational work. I look forward to meeting in person again in 2022. Until then, let us continue to work together to ensure the digital space is secure. And above all, stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you very much in participating at the Munich Cyber Security Conference 2021, our virtual event this year. Hopefully next year we all get together again here at the 𝗀𝗍𝗄𝗏 in the heart of Munich. So let me thank also Peter Möhring, and I will give the word to you. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you,
It was
Sabina.
a very interesting event, wasn't it?
It was definitely full of interesting perspectives and insights. I think the discussions have been very intense. And I don't know if the audience was able to follow during these 2 days those many angles and panels. I want to thank you, Sabina, again for moderating this intense program, which was very intense, and it had many different 50 speakers, in 2 afternoons. So that is quite a lot of work. Thank you again for that and for joining this time here on stage this event, and while the other editions you're always covering the topics, and we do hope that we will also cover part of this great event. I also want to follow what was just said by Vice Minister 𝗀𝗲𝗰𝗂𝗿𝗁. He we are grateful that the Ministry of Economic Affairs is patronizing this conference and understood very early the strategic value of this topic of information and cybersecurity, and helped to develop such an ecosystem that we have here in Germany, here in the south of Germany, in Bavaria, with research institutes, with universities, and many security companies, and also obviously public agencies who are contributing to the effort in mitigating those cyber risks in tumultuous times, as we can say. I want to thank all the speakers that have been, available. They all, got up very early or stayed up very late, like we just saw in the last panel with Japan and Miyoko Matsubara. That was way after midnight, and she was looking like just the morning had started. So wonderful for all of you to make yourself available and contribute to this conference in such a meaningful way. I want to thank all the other moderators who have been preparing the discussions and contributed to this really thrilling event. I want to ask, of course, the partners that I had mentioned before, the partners we have here, the institutional partners who contributed to the design of the program. And of course to you, the audience, who connected and followed this conference for the first time, of course, in this virtual format, for the first time online in our broadcast. I hope you didn't have problems to connect and to follow these interesting discussions. The live stream is still available on the website of the YouTube site of the Security Network Munich. So we make the link available, but that is just a rough recording. We will have a post-production and prepare, individual clips to the and publish them online, so that you'll be able to sort through all those many talks and perspectives. But now my great thanks goes, of course, to the team that organized everything that you have seen, that you have witnessed. You don't sometimes get all the the work that needs to be done to prepare an event like this, especially a digital edition. I must say it is a lot of work. And I want to thank Nina, Oliver, Lorenz, Chris, Fabian, the technical team. We have like 10 technicians here in the room. I think we have a camera perspective prepared to show you who is with us. I want to thank them all. They've been doing a great job these 2 days and the days before to set it all up. I want to thank also the band who played all the time between those windows of the program. Thank you again to be here together with us live. I think live music is always an additional energizer in a conference like this. And I would like to ask now the members of the Orga team on stage, Nina, Oliver, Lorenz is not here. So please, maybe you come and to receive your virtual applause at home where you are. So I'm sure we will feel it. Thank you really again for coming. And I want to also thank, 𝗀𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗆 and 𝗧𝗂𝗍𝗂, the two companies who covered this conference in a technical care. We used as a conference system an open source system which is called Big Blue Button. We have a blue background, so everything is corporate. Yeah, thank you again. It worked out very well. And the blue shirt, so Big Blue Button.
And a blue suit.
It's a open source software that is used here a lot in universities and academia. Great, it worked out. And so thank you to the technical team, to 𝗀𝗍𝗁𝗂𝗏, Hermann and Timo, and also 𝗀𝗲𝗁𝗂𝗏𝗏, and all his many colleagues who are here in this. Yeah, I want to thank also the hotel, Bayerischer Hof, who hosted us in such a perfect way, like always. We've been receiving a great service. It was fantastic that we could be here despite all the circumstances and the restrictions. Unfortunately, when we were planning the conference, we hoped we could be having a little bit of audience also live here and some speakers, but now the situation didn't allow for that. So we hope to see you all in person again in February 2022. And until then, stay safe and connect every once in a while to the website or write us. We are happy for any feedback. And it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you all for joining, and it was a great work, and I think there's nothing else to add. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, here we go. Bye. This concludes the conference. Thank you.